Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 1701 Persian Artillery. Because there was no movable gun mount, all 40 Portuguese cannons on the scene were lifted to the ground for placement. Before placing the cannons, engineers had already dug pits with small shovels. In order to facilitate shooting, the artillery engineers first dug out the soil and then piled up a long strip of soil to place the cannons. The angle of the cannon was not horizontal, but 5 degrees upward. Because the iron ball shells are very heavy, they are parabolic when fired, and they do not rotate. Therefore, raising the muzzle appropriately will help the shells fly farther. If the angle is flat, not only will the range of the shells become shorter, but they will also hit the ground directly. Moreover, this angle is also conducive to the artillery transmitting the recoil to the earth. In addition, the 5-degree elevation angle is also conducive to watering. Watering? Yes, watering. When the cannon is fired, the barrel will become hot. Especially for copper cannons, if they are not cooled in time, the copper will easily become soft under high temperature. Once the barrel is overheated and continues to shoot, it is easy to cause the barrel to deform. Therefore, after firing a few times, the artillerymen would directly pour water into the muzzle. The bottom of the Portuguese cannon is open, and water will enter from the muzzle and flow out from the tail. Then, the barrel will cool down sharply. Afterwards, just wipe it with a rag, and don't use a dry sponge to absorb water deep into the barrel. Why? Because it does not affect the shooting. Because the loading of the Portuguese cannon is completed in the sub-gun, which has nothing to do with the main gun. Even the iron ball is pressed in the sub-gun. Therefore, even if the main gun is wet, it will not affect the shooting of the Portuguese cannon. Of course, the water on the main gun should not wet the fuse part of the sub-gun. As for the cooling of the sub-gun, it is even simpler. The artillerymen directly throw the overheated sub-gun into the bucket. Then, pick it up and remove the water with a rag. However, the dewatering of the sub-gun must be taken seriously. After all, it is filled with gunpowder. If it is not wiped clean, it may not fire. This method of fixing the gun barrel on the ground does not require temporary aiming before firing. After all, the shooting angle and direction are fixed. However, there is a second shooting method. The second shooting method is actually what the Turks are good at, using a cart to install artillery. The method is to make a four-wheeled cart with an iron frame. The frame is made of iron, and so are the wheels. In this way, it can withstand the recoil. The barrels of the 300-pound Portuguese cannon are placed on the four-wheeled cart, lined up in a row, facing the enemy. And behind the cart, wooden stakes are inserted to hold the cart back to prevent the recoil from causing the cart to retreat. Because it is an iron-framed cart, even the recoil of the artillery will not damage the cart. But the body of the car is strong, and the bearings of the frame and wheels are not so strong. There is also the place that is most affected by the recoil of the artillery. Fortunately, the Turks have already prepared spare axles and are not afraid of losses. Of course, this is a method that the Turks will use in a hasty battle. After all, fighting against a Middle Eastern country dominated by light cavalry, one must be prepared for a hasty battle at any time. And if there is no enemy surprise attack, the Turks will still lift the gun barrel down and put it on the ground to bombard the enemy. After all, replacing the axle is also costly and troublesome. Sometimes, the axle can't bear it, and the body of the artillery collapses while bombarding. In fact, the Turks are only one step away from modern gun carriages. That is, let the cart retreat and absorb the recoil. If you use a four-wheeled cart to load the artillery to attack and fix the body, the recoil of the artillery will cause too much damage to the car. Moreover, the caliber of the artillery cannot be too large. If a large caliber artillery is placed on the car and the body is fixed, the recoil of one shot can shatter the cart. If you choose to lift the gun body off the car and place it on the ground, the artillery cannot be too heavy. If it is too heavy, the artillery can't lift it. Therefore, until the Napoleonic War, the mainstream of infantry artillery was a 3-pound gun, and the weight of the gun body did not exceed 300 pounds. If it is heavier, the artillery can't lift it. Moreover, the recoil is too large. The emergence of the retractable gun mount solved the problem of recoil, and larger caliber infantry guns became possible. Of course, there is also the problem of gunpowder consumption here. Too large caliber guns consume too much gunpowder. Just like the North Sea Kingdom cast so many heavy artillery, but basically did not use them at ordinary times. Because gunpowder can't be consumed. It was not until Marin developed Chile's saltpeter that he had the confidence to use those large caliber naval guns. However, for Persia, the 3-pound Portuguese cannon sent by Marin this time has already met the requirements. Because the Turkish infantry cannon is also of this level. As long as it is not worse than the Turkish artillery, Ismail I will be satisfied. The salvo of 40 Portuguese cannons is nothing but pediatrics in the eyes of the North Sea soldiers. Because the North Sea infantry also has 6-pound cannons and 12-pound Napoleon cannons. But in the eyes of the Persians who had rarely seen artillery, the 3-pound cannon was already very scary. Especially, in the shooting of live animals, the Persian Shah Ismail I and the Persian nobles saw with their own eyes a group of cattle and sheep being beaten to pieces by artillery, and they were extremely shocked. These people were also experienced in the battlefield, but facing the cattle and sheep whose limbs were incomplete due to the bombardment, many people still felt like vomiting. Because even if the Persian cavalry killed people, they just used scimitars to chop people. They had never seen the way that cannonballs savagely tore the bodies of cattle and sheep into pieces. But after the discomfort, the Persian monarchs and ministers were ecstatic. In the future, we also have such a big killer. Then came the matchlock shooting performance, but after seeing the earth-shaking artillery shooting, the Persian monarchs and ministers were a little uninterested in the power of matchlock guns. Shah was a little helpless, but fortunately, Badr, a spy from the North Sea Kingdom stationed in Persia, tried hard to persuade Ismail I to let the musket team perform cargo shooting. When shooting, the Persian monarchs and ministers did not see anything. But when they checked the wounds of cattle and sheep, they felt a chill. The blood holes on the bodies of cattle and sheep were basically unhealable. This is the difference between muskets and bows and arrows. Enemies shot by bows and arrows can continue to fight. There are even unlucky guys with arrows all over their bodies like hedgehogs, who still insist on fighting until they bleed more and die. But muskets are different. As long as a bullet enters the body, the combat effectiveness is basically lost. Moreover, it is basically difficult to cure. Even if the military doctors of Bahá'í Kingdom take action, they can only guarantee that the person shot has a high probability of survival, but cannot guarantee that the person shot can recover in the future. After all, the blood holes made by lead bullets are too difficult to treat. How to say it, the person shot by the arrow can not only continue to fight, but also continue to fight vigorously next time when the injury is healed. And the person shot loses his combat effectiveness on the spot. Moreover, it is easy to become disabled. Maybe someone will ask, during the War of Resistance against Japan, many people were able to continue fighting after being shot by the devils. Here I have to explain that the Japanese .38 rifle uses pointed bullets, but not lead bullets, but iron bullets. This kind of pointed bullet may have strong armor-piercing ability. But because the defense-piercing ability is too strong, it is easy to pass through the body. Moreover, the wound left is very small. Because the caliber of the .38 rifle is only 6.5 millimeters. Therefore, after being hit by the Japanese .38 rifle, there is often only a penetrating wound slightly larger than the caliber of the .38 rifle, unlike the spherical lead bullet that will cause a blood hole rolling in the body. What's interesting is that small caliber pointed bullets like the Japanese are more powerful when facing bulletproof vests and armor. With the level of bulletproof vests during World War II, they will be directly penetrated by the .38 rifle and cause fatal injuries. Because the fragments of the bulletproof vest are carried into the human body by the pointed bullet, causing great damage to the human body. Therefore, during World War II, the US and Soviet armies with bulletproof vests suffered greater damage when facing the Japanese .38 rifle. On the contrary, the poor Chinese resistance army, who wore nothing at all, managed to survive. At worst, they would just get a hole in their body. For example, the SN-42 bulletproof vests equipped by the Soviet army during World War II had a good protective effect when facing pistols and the German MP-40 submachine guns using pistol bullets. But when encountering rifles, it is safer to take off the ragged clothes. Otherwise, you will die faster. After seeing the terrible power of spherical lead bullets, Ismail I finally agreed to introduce matchlock guns. However, the purpose of his introduction of matchlock guns was mainly to protect the artillery unit. Therefore, the scale was not large. As for artillery, he promised to introduce 300 guns. Because the number of artillery in the Turkish army was so large. As the monarch of a powerful Middle Eastern country, the Persians wanted to compete with Turkey. Even artillery could not be less than Turkey. But on the price, the two sides bargained. The Persians were not satisfied with the price of 650 gold coins per gun, thinking it was too high. This was mainly because the price of copper in Persia was much cheaper than in Europe. The silver-copper price ratio in Europe was 1:15, while the copper price in Persia was not expensive because it was close to India. The silver-copper price ratio was only 1:60, which was 4 times lower than that in Europe. Therefore, they thought the price was too high and were unwilling to pay so much. However, after asking the Portuguese offered a similar price. Therefore, Ismail I reluctantly bought the 40 Portuguese cannons at this price. However, Ismail I turned around and ordered 40 Portuguese cannons of the same specifications from the Portuguese at a price of 600 gold coins per cannon, 50 gold coins cheaper than the price of the North Sea Kingdom. Then, Ismail I formed the Persian artillery army with these 80 Portuguese cannons. At the same time, he prepared to form a 500-man musketeer team to protect the safety of the artillery. Chapter 1702, Cow for Cow. Obviously, Ismail I was unwilling to be ripped off by the North Sea Kingdom. When the Portuguese expressed their willingness to sell at a discount of 50 gold coins per gun, he decisively bought 40 guns from the Portuguese. Moreover, they were dismantled from the Portuguese warships in Hormuz port. Ismail I planned to let the North Sea Kingdom worsen the competition between the Portuguese and then lower the price so that he could save a lot of money to buy guns. But the North Sea representative, Shaw, did not appreciate it and insisted on not lowering the price. Moreover, he told Ismail I that the Portuguese artillery was not as good as ours. Ismail I did not believe it, but after the Portuguese cannons in Hormuz port were delivered, after testing, the Persians had to believe it. From the appearance, there is no difference between the North Sea Kingdom's cannons and the Portuguese. However, in terms of the quality of the subguns and the gap between the mother gun and the subguns, the quality of the North Sea Kingdom's cannons is much higher. Therefore, when shooting, aiming and shooting, the Portuguese cannon of the North Sea Kingdom is obviously better. With the comparison, Ismail I had to compromise. After all, as a hegemon in the Middle East, he could not be greedy for cheap and buy inferior goods. Therefore, the next 220 orders were won by the North Sea Kingdom. Then, Shah also promoted the swords and armor made in the North Sea to Ismail I. However, the Persian cavalry only likes to use the Safi scimitar with a large curved arc. Because this is conducive to the light cavalry to chop the enemy. As for plate armor, the Persians don't like it either. After all, the Persian horses are similar to the Arabian horses and are medium-sized horses. If the rider wears plate armor, the stable can't run. Therefore, the Persians are only willing to buy the light chain mail of the North Sea Kingdom in the end. As for swords, they are only willing to import steel ingots and then make them themselves. Shah was a little helpless. Chain mail is okay, and the profit is okay. However, the profit from selling steel ingots is much less than that from selling finished swords. However, the Persians are so stubborn, and he can't do anything about it. The worst thing is that according to the agreement reached between the North Sea Kingdom and the Portuguese, the North Sea Kingdom can only sell weapons and armor to Persia, and is not allowed to involve civilian use. And the Persians do this, the profit from selling weapons and armor in the future will not be able to support the cost of buying horses and cattle from Persia. At that time, the North Sea Kingdom will have to pay cash to buy Persian cattle and sheep, which is too much of a loss. After some discussion, Ismail I basically agreed to purchase Portuguese cannons, matchlock guns, chain mail and steel ingots from the North Sea Kingdom. As for the purchase of artillery, although he agreed to the price of 650 gold coins per gun, he asked for goods instead. Among them, Persian horses. In fact, Shah was about to ask for livestock instead. Hearing Ismail I take the initiative to mention it, he pretended to agree reluctantly. Then, he began to lower the price severely. A batch of war horses, at least dozens of gold coins or even hundreds of gold coins in Europe. But Shah used the reason that Persian horses cannot carry knights wearing full body plate armor to lower the price crazily. Shah offered Persia 10 gold coins for a war horse that could still be sold for 20 gold coins in Turkey. As for ordinary Persian horses, they didn't want the bad ones, they were only offered 3 gold coins. Persian horses were cheap, and although Ismail I knew that they were being sold at a low price, he had no choice. After all, there were many Persian horses, but there was a lack of market. Although the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt and Persia were allied and willing to purchase a large number of Persian war horses, Ismail I was not very happy. Because the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt was also a potential enemy in the eyes of Ismail I. Therefore, although he agreed to sell war horses to the Egyptians, he didn't want to sell too many, lest Egypt become too powerful and threaten Persia's security. On the other hand, the North Sea Kingdom had no conflict of interest with Persia, so Ismail I could sell horses with confidence. Anyway, Persia didn't have to worry about the cavalry of the North Sea Kingdom coming to Persia. Because there were Turkey and many countries between the two sides. As for the invasion at sea, at least Ismail I knew that it was difficult to transport horses by sea. The possibility of transporting cavalry on a large scale is very low. It is very scary to be able to transport thousands of cavalry at a time. There are also many cattle and sheep in Persia. For example, Persian sheep are very famous. After all, they are the source of raw materials for Persian carpets. But Marin was not very interested in Persian cattle and sheep, and only asked for some cattle symbolically. Then, he asked for a batch of Persian black-headed sheep. Because this kind of sheep is the mother of the famous Dorper sheep in the future. Marin was not willing to give up the famous Dorper sheep in the future, so he naturally introduced this kind of sheep. Ismail I was a little puzzled about this. Because Persian carpets are made of coke wool, not Persian black-headed sheep. Strictly speaking, Persian black-headed sheep are a fast-growing meat sheep, not wool sheep. Therefore, Ismail I was a little surprised at the choice of the North Sea Kingdom. In his opinion, the best choice is to introduce Persian wool sheep and then learn how to weave Persian carpets. And the fact that the North Sea Kingdom wants meat sheep instead of wool sheep surprised Ismail I. How could he know that the North Sea Kingdom already had the best wool-producing merino sheep, as well as North Sea sheep whose wool quality was slightly inferior but better adapted to the environment? Therefore, Persian wool sheep were really not very attractive to Marin. As for Persian cattle, Marin didn't want them originally. After all, this Persian cattle is not an excellent breed. However, the purchase of Zebu cattle from India encountered trouble, so Marin had to compromise. It turned out that Marin's purchase of Zebu cattle from India was nothing at the beginning. After all, at the beginning, the purchase volume was not large, and the Indian market could accept it. However, as Marin's purchase scale expanded, he found it increasingly difficult to buy Zebu cattle. Why? Because India is also an agricultural country, and cattle are strategic resources. In ancient China, killing cattle was illegal. Although India did not manage it so strictly, it would not sell cattle casually. After all, if the cattle were sold to you, what would they use to cultivate the land? Later, Dekara, who was in charge of Indian trade, came up with a solution. He introduced dozens of African cattle from the west coast of Africa, brought them to India, and was willing to pay more money, and finally exchanged the same number of Zebu cattle from local farmers. It is too difficult to buy cattle from Africa, mainly because Africans are not very civilized at the moment, and it is difficult to buy enough cattle. Buying cattle from Persia is different. Although the proportion of Persian cattle is not large, the total number is not small. Moreover, Persia is close to India. It is more convenient to buy cattle from Persia, then transport them to India, and exchange them with Indians for humped cattle. The climate in southern Persia is also relatively hot, and the local cattle are also very heat resistant. They can adapt to being transported to India. Even if they cannot adapt, it is acceptable for a batch to die. Even if it is 2 for 1, Marin is willing. After all, humped cattle are the survival overlords of tropical rainforests. Using cheap Persian cattle to exchange for the most suitable Indian humped cattle in the tropics is not a loss. Chapter 1703 Zebu and Brass Coins. In later generations, Zebu cattle are basically the main breed in tropical areas. For example, Brazil has basically adopted the Zebu cattle introduced from India as the main breed. Although Angus cattle dominate Australia, in the tropical areas of Queensland in the north, Zebu cattle are still the main breed. After all, Zebu cattle have the best adaptability to tropical areas and are not afraid of even tropical rainforests. Of course, the cattle in Queensland, Australia, are not pure-blooded Indian Zebu cattle, but a hybrid of Brahman cattle bred by Americans and local Angus cattle, which are adapted to tropical climates and have good meat quality. This kind of hybrid cattle is basically used in tropical areas of Australia. Marin now has the most East European steppe cattle, which are cold-resistant but not heat-resistant. He plans to introduce a batch of Indian Zebu bulls and cross them with a large number of East European steppe cattle in order to obtain a heat-resistant breed similar to the Angus cattle. Of course, the original Zebu population is also expanded as much as possible. As for Persian cattle, Persia has a special climate. Although it is in the temperate zone, it is very hot in summer. Therefore, the local cattle are not afraid of heat. It is not easy to die when shipped to India. Moreover, although India is hot, its latitude is not high. Unlike Indonesia, it is directly on the equator. Moreover, the Indian region does not seem to be so humid. It is divided into dry season and rainy season. Only in the rainy season will it be rainy. Persian cattle should be able to adapt to this semi-humid tropical climate. If it is changed to the tropical rainforest climate of Indonesia, Persian cattle will not be able to adapt at all. After all, the Persian region is dry and hot, which is completely different from the tropical rainforest climate. Moreover, Marin also knows an interesting cultural phenomenon. Indians regard white cattle as sacred cattle. Among them, the white humped cattle with humps are regarded as sacred cattle by Indians. Marin dare not covet white humped cattle, which is the high caste in the cattle world. However, the variegated humped cattle can still be obtained. At most, add some money to exchange them with Persian cattle. In addition, Draka also reported an interesting phenomenon to Marin. There are also cultural differences within India. The white cattle culture is the culture of the areas where Hinduism is the mainstream in India. In such areas, it is very difficult to get cattle. But India also has the Iseran cultural area, which does not exclude the trade or even export of cattle. Even many Indian Iseran believers like to eat beef. Of course, they dare not eat white humped cattle, fearing that the Hindus will fight them. Marin is eyeing this kind of Iseran cultural area, and plans to introduce Indian humped cattle from this area. For example, Sindh, Gujarat and Bijapur on the west coast of India are Iseran states. It is relatively easy to introduce humped cattle from these 3 states as long as they are not white. What's more, Marin also compensated with Persian cattle. These days, India is divided. The Mughal dynasty, the last dynasty to unify India, did not rise until 1526. At this moment, Babur, the first emperor of the Mughal Empire, is now serving as his chief in Kabul, Afghanistan. This guy will not march into northern India until around 1519. Speaking of which, India's history is a tragedy, and it has been invaded and conquered by nomadic peoples from Central Asia all day long. Among them, Afghanistan is one of India's most important victims. Although Afghanistan is a poor and remote country in the 21st century, in the era of cold weapons, Afghanistan was a region that produced fierce cavalry. It often went to India to seek benefits, just like the nomadic peoples from the grasslands outside the pass invaded the interior. Moreover, they were much more ruthless than the nomadic peoples of the grasslands. They directly invaded India, became the master, and relegated the indigenous people to pariahs. Because of the repeated invasions of the nomadic peoples of Central Asia, the influence of Islam in India is now very large. Among them, the most powerful Delhi Sultanate is an Islamist country. There is also the rich Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a wealthy country at this time, not the poor country in later generations, which is also an Islamist country. The most interesting thing is that Gujarat and Bijapur are actually Shiite Islamist countries. These two states on the west coast have close contacts with Persia because of their beliefs, and are Persia's main trading partners in India. After all, they have the same beliefs. Marin's goal was to target these Indian Islamic states, and he planned to do everything he could to introduce Indian zebu cattle from these states that might sell cattle. It should be pointed out that India not only has zebu cattle, but also buffaloes. But only zebu cattle are respected and protected by Indians. As for buffaloes, even Hindus do not think they should be protected. The local Islamic sect Asan likes to eat buffalo meat, and the Hindus turn a blind eye to it. But Marin looked down on buffaloes and only recognized zebu cattle. Therefore, he could only find a way from the Indian Islamic states that did not pay much attention to zebu cattle. Fortunately, whether it is Sindh, Gujarat or Bijapur, they are all on the west coast of India, which is convenient for trade. In addition, Bengal in the east is also by the sea, which is convenient for trade. Of course, that was a matter for the future. At this moment, Shah was assigned by Marin to discuss oil trade with the Persians. Oil? Do you mean the black oil produced in Baku? Ismail, I did not know much about it, but had only heard of it. Shah nodded repeatedly. Yes, Your Majesty, we want that, in large quantities. Why do you want that? It seems to be useless. It can only be used to treat skin diseases of livestock. We want to use it to treat skin diseases of livestock. Shah said sincerely. In fact, he really believed that oil was used to treat skin diseases of livestock. Because Marin did not tell him the truth. Ismail, I was not very interested in the oil trade, so he waved his hand and said indifferently, you should discuss this issue with the Prime Minister and the Governor of Azerbaijan. I don't bother to manage it. Okay, then thank Your Majesty for your hospitality. I will go to Prime Minister Ajad to discuss this matter. Shah said respectfully. But when he stood up, a little accident happened. The purse on Shah's waist fell to the ground, and the gold, silver and copper coins in it were scattered all over the ground. Among them, some coins rolled on the ground and rolled to the feet of Ismail I. Ismail I picked up a few coins curiously and held them in his hands to observe. What he got was a brass coin minted and issued by Marin in the North Sea Kingdom. It was golden and very beautiful. Is this the gold coin of your country? Ismail I asked curiously. Shah picked up the money and looked at the coin in Ismail I's hand, and answered casually, no, this is our copper coin. Copper coin? Isn't the copper coin dark red? This is obviously golden. But soon, Ismail I also felt something was wrong. Because this gold coin is much lighter than a normal gold coin, and it is almost as heavy as a copper coin. Shah explained, this is a unique copper coin invented by our country, using a unique alchemical technique. It looks golden and similar to gold. But in fact, it is called brass, a very bright copper. It is used to mint coins, and the people can't imitate it even if they want to mint it privately. Can't imitate it? Ismail I's eyes lit up. Chapter 1704, Coinage on behalf of others. Yes, it can't be imitated. Shah said proudly. Then, he pointed to the brass coin and gave Ismail I a detailed introduction. Your Majesty, please look, this kind of copper coin is not only golden in color and difficult to imitate. Moreover, the craftsmanship is quite sophisticated. Look, the handwriting and pattern on it are very exquisite and clear, aren't they? The brass coins of the North Sea Kingdom are pressed out by a spiral coin press while hot, so they are naturally much more exquisite than those made by hand by craftsmen. Not only are the patterns exquisite, but the handwriting is also very prominent and clear. It looks very high-end. There is no way, machine-made ones are just more standard than manual ones. Ismail I compared other copper coins with the copper coins of the North Sea Kingdom, and sure enough, Shah was not bragging. The casting of copper coins is much more difficult than gold coins. Gold coins are soft, so it is easy for craftsmen to knock them. Copper is different. Copper is only soft when it is just out of the furnace, which is more suitable for knocking and forming. However, it is difficult for craftsmen to knock the copper coins in a short time. When the copper coins cool down, they are difficult to process. Therefore, before the appearance of the coin casting machine, the writing and patterns on the copper coins were always worse than those on the gold coins. However, the copper coins of the North Sea Kingdom were pressed vigorously with a spiral coin casting machine while they were hot, and their patterns were exquisite and their clarity was no less than that of gold and silver coins. The more he looked at them, the more Ismail I liked the brass coins of the North Sea Kingdom. After putting down the brass coins, Ismail I struggled for a long time on his face, and suddenly said, "Messenger, I would like to ask if your country can help Persia to cast a batch of copper coins." "What?" Shah thought he had heard it wrong. "I mean, I want to ask your country to help Persia to cast a batch of brass coins like this." Shah was stunned and said, "Your Majesty, this coinage is also asked to be cast by foreign countries." Anyway, Shah had never heard of such a thing. You know, coinage is also profitable, especially the casting of gold and silver coins, which has high profits. Moreover, engraving the monarch's head on the coin also has very important political significance. Therefore, under normal circumstances, as long as the European monarch has the right to mint coins, he will not let others do it. In particular, they were unwilling to give up the huge profits from the seigniorage of minting gold and silver coins to others. Ismail I blushed and explained, "It's like this. Although Persia is large, it lacks metals and copper. Therefore, we in Persia currently mainly use foreign currencies. Yes, the huge Persia does not have its own minting institution now, and mainly relies on the introduction of foreign currencies to meet market demand." If Shah had read the introduction of the Safavid Empire of Persia, he would have written in the economy column that, the Safavid Empire, mainly exported carpets, silk and textiles. Other exports included horses, wool, pearls and almonds used as condiments in India. The main imports were coins, textiles, spices, metals, coffee and sugar. In other words, coins ranked first among the imported products of the Safavid dynasty of Persia. In other words, the dignified Safavid dynasty of Persia did not have the ability to mint its own coins, but relied on importing currencies from abroad. At present, the more common coins on the Persian market are silver and copper coins from India. Of course, there are also dinar gold coins that are more popular in the entire Iseran world. However, the Indian silver coins are very pitfalls compared to the Lang. Because, when the Indian monarchs minted coins, they tried their best to mix copper, lead and other impurities into this silver coin. As a result, the quality of India's Burong silver coins was as bad as that of European silver coins. As for copper coins, there is nothing to say. Because there is nothing to add. The metal cheaper than copper is probably iron, but iron and copper do not blend and are difficult to mix together. Therefore, copper coins are nothing. The copper coin in India is called tanka, and a tanka copper coin weighs about 7 grams. There are also half tanka copper coins, weighing 3.5 grams, which are similar to European gold coins. Ismail I plan to ask the North Sea Kingdom to help mint half tanka brass coins. Of course, use Persian and Persian units. Ismail I plan to imitate India's half tanka copper coin and set its weight at 3.5 grams. In fact, the Persian Safavid Empire did not mint coins, but minted very few coins. For example, Ismail I once ordered the minting of Persian dinar gold coins. However, only a small number of gold coins were minted as a symbol of royal power. As for silver and copper coins, I'm sorry, I don't have the strength or the materials. So, at this time, the currency of the Safavid Empire was quite messy. There were not only Indian dinar gold coins, Adris silver coins, and Byron silver coins with very low silver content, but also tanka copper coins. Of course, there were also Portuguese real silver coins. But as the Portuguese gradually monopolized the Persian trade, as a result, Persian-Portuguese currency became more and more. In modern times, because of the deep influence of Portugal, Iran in later generations directly named the currency rial. Of course, this is a matter for the future. But now, Ismail I has also seen the bad consequences. That is, because of his own inability to mint coins on a large scale, the market is about to be occupied by foreign currencies. This is not good for the rule of the Safavid dynasty, so Ismail I wanted to mint coins himself. However, because there were no materials and a lack of minting craftsmen, Ismail I was unable to put it into practice. But this time, Shah's visit made Ismail I think of another possibility: let foreigners help mint coins. Although it is a bit embarrassing to do so. However, it is even more embarrassing to let foreign currencies flood the market. Ismail I actually does not need the market to be full of domestic currencies. He just wants to see his own currency everywhere in the market to compete with foreign currencies. This is enough. Moreover, the brass coins minted by the North Sea Kingdom are really exquisite. If some scriptures and famous quotes are added to the gold coins, especially the propaganda texts of Shiites, it will be beneficial to the rule of the Safavid dynasty. In the end, Ismail I decided to engrave the same Persian text on the new Persian Safavid Empire copper coins as on the gold coins: the fair, guiding, and powerful Sultan, the victorious Ismail Shah Khan, may God bless him with everything he has forever. This paragraph of words is very long, directly filling the front of the copper coin, and there is no way to engrave the head portrait. But Ismail I didn't care, because the coins of the Islamic Persian Empire were not used to engraving portraits, but liked to engrave the scriptures and maxims in the ancient Blue Book. In fact, the real reason was that they were afraid that the craftsman would not be able to engrave well and affect the image of the monarch. But after seeing the exquisite brass coins of the North Sea Kingdom, Ismail I was also a little hesitant. After all, engraving one's own portrait on the coins for people to watch and admire is also an option. So, Ismail I and Shah agreed that the North Sea Kingdom would make 2 versions of sample coins and then send them to him for him to see, and he would make the final decision. As for the side portrait of Ismail I, it was provided by the Persian court painter. However, it will take some time. And Ismail I and Shah agreed that if the sample coins are qualified and the North Sea Kingdom offers a reasonable price, he is willing to ask the North Sea Kingdom to manufacture 50 million new copper coins. Chapter 1705 The Benefits of Coinage. Shah had no right to decide such a big order, but he could ask Marin for instructions. It just so happened that after Spy Bader was stationed in Persia, he had established a pigeon delivery route that could be transferred along the line from Persia to Ukraine to the German mainland. So, the letter of request was sent back to the mainland by pigeon, asking Marin for instructions. Marin was also surprised to see that Persia actually wanted to ask the North Sea Kingdom to help mint brass coins. Ismail I's bid was relatively low, and he was only willing to be slightly higher than the Persian copper price. The Persian silver-copper price ratio was 1 to 60. If this price ratio was really followed, even if the price was raised a little, Marin would not make much money. Thinking of this, Marin was going to refuse. But later, I don't know what he thought of, he still agreed. Why did Marin agree to take such a low profit or extremely low profit order? Not for profit, but for influence. Let me ask, if Persia relies on the North Sea Kingdom for coinage in the future, can it not rely on the North Sea Kingdom economically? The North Sea Kingdom has the right to mint coins for Persia. When the time comes, if you want to go to Persia to buy things, you can directly start the machine to mint Persian brass coins. Anyway, the money mold is ready, just get more copper plates for forging. Then, take it directly to Persia to exchange cattle, sheep and oil, without spending gold and silver. And this is what Marin values most. Persia is at least a top power in the Middle East. Mastering the right to mint coins in a country is definitely the best way to influence a country. Although the profit of minting copper coins is not high, the political influence is immeasurable. Therefore, Marin finally agreed to help Persia mint 50 million copper coins at a silver-copper price ratio of 1 to 50. As for the reason for the price increase, it is that brass coins are not pure copper, but need to add a lot of rare precious metals. Then, there is the cost of manual forging. In fact, zinc is not expensive, at least cheaper than copper, but Marin is the only one in the world who knows how to extract zinc. He is the only one in the world, and there is no semicolon. He said it is expensive, and Ismail I didn't understand it anyway. Moreover, if zinc is mixed with more, the cost can be reduced. After all, zinc mining costs are low, and its content in ore is much higher than copper. Later, this decision was passed to Persia by carrier pigeons through the newly built carrier pigeon delivery route. After receiving Marin's reply, Ismail I felt that the price was fair, so he agreed to the number. However, the specific type of brass coin to be minted must wait for the sample coins to be delivered. In fact, if Marin purchases copper from Persia and takes it back to mint coins, he may not make money or even lose money. But if he purchases copper ingots from India, where the silver-copper exchange rate is more than 1 to 80, then there will be profit. Although the profit cannot be compared with maritime trade, it is also profitable. But profit is not important. Compared with being able to easily influence and control the Persian economy through coin minting, this profit is nothing. Moreover, even if only these 50 million copper coins are minted for Persia, the profit is not low. In addition to the low cost of introducing copper from India or the Ming dynasty, this batch of copper coins was also directly taken to Persia to buy livestock. In fact, Ismail I did not intend to price this batch of brass coins according to the silver-copper exchange rate of 1 hour 60 minutes, but directly priced this batch of copper coins at the price of Malinti. In this way, according to the silver-copper exchange rate of 150, 50 copper coins are equivalent to the value of 1 silver coin of equal weight. In addition, the gold-silver exchange rate in Persia is also different from that in Europe. The gold-silver exchange rate here is similar to that in India, which is about 110, instead of 112 in Europe. In other words, 500 brass coins can be exchanged for 1 gold coin of equal weight. The weight of the brass coin is 3.5 grams, which is about the same as the weight of the European gold coin. In other words, 50 million brass coins can be used as 100,000 gold coins in Persia. Once these 50 million brass coins are cast, they are not sent to Persia to exchange for gold and silver, but directly exchanged for horses, cattle, sheep and oil. These 50 million brass coins alone can buy 10,000 war horses from Persia. They are war horses, not ordinary Persian horses. Persian horses are only 10 gold coins each, which is really cheap. There is no way around it, because Persia has no export market. Before reaching cooperation with Egypt, Persia only had two Shiite states in India as horse export targets. But the cavalry of these two states is not large, and the import quantity is limited. Therefore, the price is naturally not high. In fact, war horses in Turkey and Crimea can be sold for 20 gold coins each, also because they are close to Europe. Affected by the high prices in Europe, the price of war horses has been hyped up so high. The price here in Persia is the normal price for a nomadic country. In the Ming dynasty, where war horses were scarce, the price was only 20 taels of silver, equivalent to 17.4 gold coins, per horse, not to mention the Middle East, which was not short of horses. The price of horses in the Ming dynasty was so high, but they were still slaughtered by the grassland tribes. Before that, Marin had been worried that there would be no goods to exchange with Persia. After all, it would be too much of a loss to use gold and silver directly, and there was not enough in the country. If it was exchanged with goods, the Portuguese would not agree. Now, the Persians asked the North Sea Kingdom to help mint brass coins, and there was no problem. In the future, if you want to buy a horse, you can directly mint 5,000 Persian brass coins and use them to buy horses in Persia. As for the brass for minting coins, the cost is really not high. As long as you don't use the expensive copper in Europe, but use the cheap copper from India and the Ming dynasty, and add zinc metal, the cost can be reduced a lot. At present, not only the Balkans lead zinc-silver mine in Newfoundland is constantly producing zinc ingots, but the Goslar lead zinc-silver mine has also begun to produce zinc metal. However, because zinc metal can only be used to make tinplate at present, and the amount of tinplate is currently very low. Therefore, the North Sea Kingdom has a lot of zinc ingots there and has nowhere to use them. It is definitely a good choice to use them for coinage. However, it seems that zinc brass will have problems if the zinc content exceeds 20%. But it doesn't matter, the worst case is to control the zinc content within 20%, and the profit is relatively large. In fact, the greatest significance of helping Persia to cast brass coins this time is that Marin found a suitable commodity to trade with Persia, coins. With this transaction, Marin wants to buy livestock and oil from Persia in the future. At most, he can open a mold and cast another batch. Moreover, if the quantity is not too large, the Persians will even welcome it. Sure enough, when Shah and Ismail I continued to negotiate, Ismail I made it clear that he did not mind the North Sea Kingdom casting more Persian brass coins. Anyway, Persia itself does not have the ability to cast coins on a large scale, but only symbolically cast some gold and silver coins that symbolize royal power. In terms of copper coins, the market is flooded with foreign currencies. Instead of letting cheap copper coins from India flood the Persian market, it is better to let the Persian brass coins cast by the North Sea Kingdom flood the market. After all, although this was made with the help of foreigners, it uses Persian and Persian styles, and it also represents the Persian court. As long as the price is reasonable, Ismail I does not care if the North Sea Kingdom makes more. Anyway, he thought that the huge Persian market could take it. Moreover, the North Sea Kingdom was just a small principality, how strong could its coinage ability be? This judgment was reasonable under normal circumstances, but Ismail I did not know that the coins of the North Sea Kingdom were no longer made by hand, but pressed by machines, and the efficiency was not improved a little bit. As long as there are enough copper plates, the machines can press as many as they want. Later, the shameless Marin really minted hundreds of millions of brass coins and took them to Persia to buy things. But because the price Marin gave was relatively reasonable, he did not disrupt the economic order of Persia, but promoted the prosperity of the Persian market. Chapter 1706 Brass, Gold, Jewelry and India. Because Persia lacks metals, the price of metals is expensive. Marin only helps to cast brass coins at a little premium according to the Persian market price, which is actually not much different from helping Persia to cast coins for free. It's just that the Persian court did not enjoy the profit of coinage. But the Persian court has no such business at all, so it doesn't matter. Moreover, hundreds of millions of brass coins sound like a lot, but the value of copper coins is low, and they are the least valuable low-level currencies. Converted into gold coins, it's only 1,000,000 gold coins. What's more, copper coins themselves have value. Therefore, Marin's approach seems a bit shameless, but it helps Persia. Persia is not a small country. It is a regional power including Iran, Iraq, Azerbaijan and Armenia in later generations. Its status in the world is equivalent to the later country of Asen. It is a big country that is not very strong, but it should not be underestimated. For such a big country, hundreds of millions of copper coins will not have much impact at all. What's more, copper coins themselves have very high value. In addition, Marin thinks he has no moral integrity, but Persian merchants are no less. A Persian Jewish businessman, while doing business between Persia and India, found that the brass coins he used were often mistaken for gold coins. Although Indians could tell from the weight that it was not gold, the appearance of brass was too similar to gold. Then, this guy did something. What did he do? He melted the brass coins that Marin had minted for Persia, and then made them into the style of gold jewelry and sold them to poor Indian women. This idea is really strange, but it is really powerful. What kind of country is India? It is a country where women like to wear gold jewelry all over their bodies. In later generations, even Indian women in slums like to wear golden jewelry all over their bodies. Of course, don't think that they are wearing real gold jewelry. In later generations, the gold jewelry worn by women in Indian slums is actually mostly fake gold jewelry painted with gold paint. Many are made of aluminum jewelry with a layer of gold paint on the surface. Those who have a little money buy low purity and low quality gold jewelry, which costs only half the price of ordinary gold. In those days, there were no high quality imitation gold lacquers. Therefore, there were few fake gold jewelry painted with gold lacquer. In this era, the gold jewelry worn by ordinary Indian women was mostly low purity and low quality gold jewelry, as long as it was as bright as gold. This Persian Jewish businessman named Ain found that melting brass coins to make gold jewelry and then selling it to poor Indian women at a premium was very popular. Poor Indian women could not afford real gold, but they were eager to wear gold jewelry to show off. In addition, wearing gold jewelry was also conducive to marriage. Therefore, Ain's brass jewelry gave them the best choice. Ain sold brass jewelry to poor Indian women at a price several times the value of the brass coin itself, especially those high-caste Indian women with poor economic conditions, and it was very popular. Moreover, wearing brass jewelry all over the body is much lighter than wearing real gold jewelry. After all, the density of copper is much lighter than gold. In this way, Ain later made a lot of money by melting brass coins cast by the North Sea Kingdom for Persia. Then, many Persian merchants began to imitate him. Until the representative of the North Sea Kingdom got the news in Persia, then, the shameless Marin personally went out and snatched the business from these Persian merchants. The Indian market is so fucking big, and it is very profitable to make fake gold jewelry with brass. After all, there are many more poor people than rich people in India, and the demand is also great. Then, Marin also got a channel to exchange goods for Indian goods, so as not to have to exchange things with real gold and silver. In Indian society, the poor upper castes are a very ridiculous group. They are as poor as the untouchables or not much better, but they have a strong self-esteem that the untouchables do not have. In the words of the Chinese, it is very face-saving, the kind of face that die for face and live in suffering. If a woman goes out without wearing full gold jewelry, it will make the man look incompetent. It just so happens that the fake gold jewelry made of brass produced by the North Sea Kingdom can pretend to be gold jewelry. As long as you don't weigh it, you can hardly tell that it is fake. Moreover, its price makes it affordable for ordinary people. Then, this market is huge. You know, Indian women even wear gold nose rings on their noses to show off their gold. It is said that when the British colonial army of the East India Company broke into Indian cities, in addition to looting the treasury, they would not let go of ordinary people. Because at that time, there were no fake gold lacquer jewelry, and ordinary people also had jewelry made of low purity gold. As long as you enter a house that is not too poor and open the woman's jewelry box, you can always find gold. There are unlucky Indian women with gold nose rings on their noses, and they were directly pulled off by colonial robbers, bleeding. Of course, that is a matter for the future, and Marin doesn't know it now. If he knew, he would definitely jump for joy. Because this is a big business. In the future, every Chinese knows that it is especially easy to make money from women and children. There are so many poor women in India, how much demand there is for fake gold jewelry. This is a country that is morbidly obsessed with gold, even the poor are obsessed with it. The market for fake gold jewelry and inferior gold jewelry in India in the future is so large that it is unbelievable. When an Indian woman gets married, she can't even get married unless she is covered with several kilograms of gold jewelry. Later, Marin asked Kong Tai to select a jeweler named Zhou Dafu in Daming, and bring a large group of apprentices to India to make cheap brass jewelry for Marin's jewelry store. Then, a brass, gold jewelry store called Dafu became a holy place in the minds of poor women in India. Because there are dazzling and beautiful gold jewelry here, and the price is very cheap. The most terrifying thing is that Marin, a time traveler, also plagiarized the classic Indian song, The Bride Married, but the groom was not me, actually a translation error, it should be called, Burning Love. Let a group of Indian men and women wearing Dafu jewelry dance in front of the jewelry store, and sing, Burning Love. In addition, there is a violin accompaniment. Don't ask Marin how to remember this song, damn, Marin listened to this song too much in his previous life. Whenever there is an Indian dance program, whether it is in college or at the company's annual meeting, this song is played. This song is just like the divine song of Phoenix legend, which brainwashes people over and over again. Even if Marin doesn't understand Hindi, he just remembers how to sing and pronounce it. Speaking of which, when it comes to Indian songs and dances, the melody of this song, including the female voices, do. Chapter 1707 Borrowing Cannons. 1515 was an unusual year. Originally, Louis XII died in that year. At the same time, the French and the Swiss fell out, hired German mercenaries, and joined forces with the Italians to defeat the arrogant Swiss spearmen, forcing the Swiss alliance to declare permanent neutrality. The Battle of Marignano, which changed history, announced the decline of the Swiss spear formation and also symbolized the rise of French artillery. The Swiss lost 11,000 people in the first battle, and since then they have withdrawn from the mainstream battlefield in Europe and become supporting roles. Of course, in that war, the French did not face the main force of the entire Swiss army, but only the Swiss Eastern coalition. The western Swiss states, led by the state of Bern, were bribed by France with 700,000 gold coins because of their closeness to France. A total of 12,000 Swiss mercenaries withdrew from the battlefield, leaving only 20,000 Eastern Swiss mercenaries to fight the French army, and were defeated in one battle, losing the great reputation of the Swiss mercenaries. However, because of Marin's travel, this war was destined to be impossible. Because France and Switzerland did not fall out. Under Marin's intervention, the weak Habsburg family actually occupied half of Switzerland. As a result, the Swiss could not be as arrogant as they were in history, nor did they dare to turn against France. Even, they had to rely on the power of France to seek to expel the Habsburg army in Switzerland. Since 10,000 Swiss mercenaries returned to the Swiss battlefield, the strength comparison of the Swiss battlefield has changed. Although the Habsburg army has more troops, it is really no match for Switzerland in the field. Even a famous general like Frundsberg could not compete with the Swiss resistance because his soldiers were too weak. The 15,000 troops of Frundsberg's headquarters, which were trained by Frundsberg himself, adopted the training method of the North Sea Kingdom. Naturally, their combat effectiveness was not inferior to that of Swiss mercenaries. However, more than half of the other troops were ordinary German mercenaries who were gathered and hired. Their combat effectiveness and fighting will were not very strong, and it was difficult to compete with the Swiss. Therefore, despite having more troops, the Habsburg army had to fall behind and was forced to take a defensive position. Fortunately, Marin took good care of the Habsburgs and provided a large amount of cement. He built dozens of cement fortresses on the main roads in the Swiss mountains, which were easy to defend and difficult to attack. In addition, the defenders were equipped with a lot of matchlock guns, which greatly increased the defensive ability of the fortress. Now, the weakness of the Swiss was exposed. Swiss mercenaries mainly used spears. Although they were strong in the wild, their ability to attack was very poor. The dozens of cement fortresses that Marin helped the Habsburgs build guarded the east-west roads in the Swiss mountains, which were easy to defend and difficult to attack. Therefore, even if the commander of the Swiss resistance army, Sieg, was very capable, he could do nothing about it. There is no way. Who said that Switzerland is full of mountains? Just find a few passes on the main roads of the valleys and build a cement fortress that is larger than the Devil's artillery tower, which can resist thousands of troops and make the fierce Swiss spearmen in the field helpless. In fact, the previous Battle of Lübeck, in which the Swiss mercenaries were defeated, had exposed the weakness of the Swiss mercenaries' fear of firearms. But the Swiss still didn't pay attention, and in that battle, Marin used too many means to make the Swiss mercenaries lose in a daze, but they didn't pay attention to the restraint of firearms on Swiss pikemen. After all, Swiss mercenaries are just a group of mountain people, who can't read a few words and don't know what arms restraint is. Just like the Swiss pikemen, it was by relying on the advantage of pikemen restraining plate knights that they defeated and killed the Duke of Burgundy, Charles the Bold, who was mainly composed of plate knights, and became famous in Europe. From then on, the Swiss began to be extremely confident that their pikemen could solve all opponents. But they didn't know that muskets and artillery were the natural enemies of Swiss pikemen. Historically, Swiss mercenaries have suffered two major setbacks. One was the Battle of Marignano, which originally took place in 1515. In that battle, the French artillery used a cluster of 70 artillery pieces to defeat the Swiss pike charge. Another battle that made the Swiss completely withdraw from the stage of history was when Frundsberg, who was originally known as the father of German mercenaries, in history, led German mercenaries to fight off the charge of Swiss pikemen with dense muskets in the Battle of Baikaka and won the final victory. Later, in the Battle of Pavia in 1525, German mercenaries who used a large number of muskets directly defeated the French army in Swiss mercenaries in the western canton. The eastern Swiss mercenaries had been crippled in the Battle of Marignano, and even captured the King of France, Francis I. After the Battle of Pavia, Swiss mercenaries completely withdrew from the mercenary stage. Because German mercenaries replaced them. German mercenaries showed stronger combat effectiveness, and the commission was cheaper. In fact, the Swiss commission was too high, so they naturally replaced the position of Swiss mercenaries and robbed their business. But now, in a different time and space, Swiss mercenaries have not withdrawn from the stage of history. Because they have not suffered a devastating blow. Even when the Swiss were defeated in the Battle of Lübeck, Marin did not kill many Swiss mercenaries. Therefore, the Swiss were still strong. In addition, Marin was good at conspiracy and intrigue, which led the Swiss to believe that they lost because of conspiracy and intrigue, rather than backward tactics and tactics. For example, now, Sieg, with more than 20,000 Swiss spearmen, was thinking all day about how to attack the more than 30,000 Habsburg troops guarding the fortress. Strange, right? 27,000 Swiss spearmen were actually thinking about how to break through the fortress guarded by 35,000 Habsburg troops. Obviously, the Swiss are not generally confident. But no matter how fierce they are in the wild, facing the concrete fortress, the Swiss are at a loss. Then, they thought of the French artillery. Originally, King Louis XII of France planned to send a large army to help Switzerland defeat and expel the Habsburg army in Switzerland after the autumn harvest. Unfortunately, because the eastern and northeastern parts of France suffered from autumn harvest rain disasters and lacked military rations. As a result, the French plan to help the Swiss attack the Habsburg army was stranded. Louis XII could only helplessly say, "Let's talk about it next year." Moreover, Louis XII also found that it seemed that the German mercenary general Ludendorff, who was forced to accept his employment, did not listen to his command very much. For example, Louis XII asked Ludendorff to lead the army to attack the Muster Valley, and took advantage of the situation to attack the Graubünden region of Switzerland, and attacked Frundsberg's army from behind. As a result, Ludendorff's army did not work hard. It seemed that they were attacking, but they lost only a few hundred soldiers after attacking for several months. In fact, the hundreds of soldiers lost were deliberately hidden by Ludendorff. It was obviously just a show. Not only Louis XII saw this, but even Sieg saw it. This also made Sieg realize that the French could not be counted on this year, and they had to rely on themselves. And the Swiss were unwilling to wait until the end of the year. Who knows what will happen at the end of the year? After all, the French and Spanish armies are confronting each other in Naples, and they may not have time to support Switzerland. Therefore, Sieg finally made a decision, to borrow artillery from the French, in order to use artillery to blow up the dozens of fortresses across the important roads and clear the obstacles for the Swiss army to march eastward. Sieg had fought many battles with the French and knew the power of artillery. If more artillery was mobilized, it should be possible to break through the small fortresses on the mountain roads. By then, when the road to the east was opened, Sieg could lead his troops to go around the enemy and cut off their supply lines. As for the enemy coming out of the city to obstruct, when have Swiss mercenaries ever been afraid of field battles? Chapter 1708, Death of Louis XII. France is one of the few artillery powers in Europe in this era. Before the appearance of Marin, a big bomber from the future, France has always been the country with the largest number of artillery in Europe. Every time the French army goes to war, the main force will bring hundreds of artillery, and at least 70 or 80. At the beginning, the French relied on artillery bombardment to defeat the English longbowmen and win the 100 Years' War. However, Marin, the time traveler, is even more ruthless. He came from China in the future, which is a big bomber country that's superstitious about firepower. In the war with you monkeys, China used millions of artillery shells to wash the ground and beat you monkeys so that they couldn't raise their heads. Marin, who has been baptized by bombardment since childhood, attaches great importance to artillery. Today, the total number of artillery in the North Sea Kingdom has reached hundreds, which is several times that of France. In fact, because of the iron mold casting method, as long as there is enough gun copper, Marin can cast as many copper cannons as he wants. Even if large-caliber iron cannons are difficult to cast, the North Sea Kingdom has cast a lot of them, mainly for naval guns on warships. However, Marin was very low-key and never showed off his cannons. Therefore, no one knew that the North Sea Kingdom had so many cannons. France has always been high-profile and is the most powerful country in Europe. Therefore, French cannons are more famous. Of course, the Swiss did not have a good relationship with the North Sea Kingdom. They wanted to borrow cannons from Marin, but Marin would not give them to them. Therefore, Sieg could only seek to borrow cannons from the French to bombard those cement fortresses. However, Sieg did not know that Marin had spent a lot of money to help the Habsburg family build a fortress. He not only used cement, but also asbestos fibers to make fiber concrete. Although the strength is not as good as reinforced concrete, it is also very strong. Of course, if the Swiss can get heavy artillery, asbestos fiber concrete is indeed not good enough. However, Sieg borrowed cannons from the French. The caliber of the French cannons is generally not large, and the largest is generally only 3 pounds. This kind of small cannon can't do anything with asbestos fiber concrete. Moreover, in the west-facing part of some important fortresses, Marin also provided a batch of steel bars. Reinforced concrete is difficult to deal with even for the cannons of later generations, let alone the smoothbore cannons of this era. Moreover, when Marin was helping the Habsburgs build a fortress, he deliberately built a bastion structure. This is the most resistant structure to artillery fire. Therefore, Sieg's plan failed at the beginning. But Sieg didn't know that he went to Paris in person to meet Louis XII, hoping to borrow 40 artillery pieces to remove those concrete fortresses. Moreover, he hoped that France could provide professional artillery. After all, these days, artillery is a purely technical job that cannot be trained in a few years. Louis XII was busy making villains at the moment and had no time to pay attention to Sieg. However, supporting Switzerland against the Habsburgs is France's consistent policy. So, after thinking about it, he agreed to lend Sieg 25 artillery pieces, including the artillery and ammunition for these artillery pieces. After all, Louis XII would definitely be happy to see the Habsburg family in trouble. Sieg happily took 25 French cannons back, while Louis XII continued to be busy making villains. It was not that Louis XII was lustful, but King Edward of England had sent a letter to remind Louis XII that if no prince was born in France within 1515, Princess Margaret would not consider marrying France. After all, Princess Margaret would not marry a boy who was more than 10 years younger than her. Therefore, Louis XII was very anxious at this moment, anxious to give birth to a prince within this year. In order to give birth to a prince, Louis XII had no time to deal with state affairs or to trouble Marin these days, but was busy making villains with Queen Anne in the backyard of the palace all day long. With the help of the substances added to the fat brother's food, Louis XII looked quite brave and fought day and night. Unfortunately, Louis XII didn't know that Queen Anne under him had already lost her fertility. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't give birth to a prince. Not to mention the prince, even the princess is impossible. Moreover, even if Queen Anne is still fertile, it is not scientific to do it every day. According to the scientific theory of later generations, women are more likely to get pregnant only in the 10 days before the menstruation. And the days after the menstruation are the legendary safe period. On such days, no matter how hard you try, it's useless. But Louis XII didn't understand. He worked day and night for the birth of the prince. Except for a few days of rest during the Queen's period, he worked hard every day. And Queen Anne is no longer the young and beautiful niece-in-law coveted by Louis XII. Louis XII was the cousin of Charles VIII, and Queen Anne was the queen of Charles VIII. Today, Queen Anne is 37 years old. In later generations, with the magic of makeup, women may not look old. But in this era, even if Anne is the queen, she will inevitably begin to age after the age of 30. In particular, white women age earlier than yellow women. Today, Queen Anne is no longer young and beautiful, and signs of aging such as crow's feet are beginning to appear on her face. The most terrifying thing is that Queen Anne has become fat. The once beautiful Queen Anne, nourished by the delicious food of the fat brother, has begun to grow horizontally. The originally ordinary waistline has directly turned into a bucket waist. And the face is also full of flesh. Double chins and so on are just normal operations. The most terrifying thing is that when she sleeps at night, Queen Anne begins to snore. Moreover, a 37-year-old woman is at an extremely ferocious age. The so-called tigers and wolves refer to women of this age. But Louis XII is just a 52-year-old thin old man. Although he is the King of France, Louis XII is busy with state affairs and all kinds of troubles every day. Although the living conditions are good, the body has always been sub-healthy. To be honest, Louis XII couldn't hold Queen Anne, who was as fat as Jia Ling. But for the sake of French romance, Louis XII had to endure nausea every day, accompany the Queen to eat candlelight dinners, and say some corny love words. At night, Louis XII was actually quite scared. Saying that Queen Anne is Jia Ling is a bit of a compliment to her. At least, although Jia Ling has a lot of flesh, her face does not look old. But Queen Anne is not only fat, but also looks old. If you give a reference, it is a Russian ant. Facing such a villain, it would be strange if Louis XII could do it. Guaida said it well, a kiss between a middle-aged couple can cause nightmares for several nights. At the moment, Louis XII was in such a state. When doing things, he dared not look at Queen Anne. However, in order to give birth to the most orthodox heir to France, and to peacefully unite with the mortal enemy Kingdom of England without spending a single soldier, Louis XII fought hard. Every time, before making a small man with Queen Anne, Louis XII would cheer himself up, for France. For the prince. Then, he could muster the courage to die generously and pounce on the fat ant like Queen Anne. Hurry up. Your Majesty. Queen Anne's fleshy face was full of impatience. If she hadn't been concerned about her husband being a king, she would have slapped him in the face. What the hell? So powerless. Louis XII had no words to say. It was cold in the early spring these 2 days, and he caught a cold and felt a little weak. However, for the prince, he had to work hard. 2 minutes later, Louis XII surrendered. Queen Anne was very dissatisfied. She pushed Louis XII and complained, "Your Majesty, work hard, for the prince, for England." She was embarrassed to say that she had to manage the goose, so she could only motivate Louis XII in this way. Louis XII rested for a long time before he recovered his breath. He wanted to end it, but after hearing the encouragement from the Queen, he rekindled his fighting spirit. For France. After Louis XII shouted the slogan, he continued to work hard. Unfortunately, he was very weak at this time, and the consequence of trying to do it twice was that Louis XII foamed at the mouth on the Queen's belly. But Queen Anne did not notice the danger, because in order to avoid seeing Queen Anne's anti-face clearly, Louis XII deliberately turned off the lights before doing it. Then, his foaming at the mouth was not discovered by Queen Anne in time. Moreover, it was not the first time that Louis XII fell on her to rest for a while after being exhausted. When Louis XII's body began to cool down, Queen Anne realized that something was wrong. "Your Majesty has passed away." Queen Anne's terrified scream came from the palace. Chapter 1709, Termination of Employment Contract. The sudden death of Louis XII, and the fact that he died at the hands of the Queen, caused a violent reaction in France. After all, the way Louis XII died was really cowardly and weird. However, more important than this is that Europe has changed. France is the most powerful country in Europe, Turkey is not recognized as a European country, and the death of the King of France has a huge impact on the political landscape of Europe. Moreover, the succession to the throne of France is problematic. Because France currently does not have a popular heir. At the same time, no one thought that Louis XII, who was only 52 years old, would suddenly die. In other words, the succession of the throne of France was hasty and unprepared. After all French people know that Louis XII has been trying to give birth to a prince as the heir to the kingdom. And the son-in-law, François I, is actually just a spare tire. Once Louis XII died, François I, the spare tire, would come to power, and then there would be a lack of foundation. Because Louis XII never trained him as the crown prince, nor did he allow him to be the crown prince. Therefore, even if he inherited the throne, François I had no foundation. At least, within 1515, François I had to spend energy to sort out a bunch of messes in France. The most important thing is to integrate the French political arena and gain the support of most of the nobles. In history, François I was lucky. Because, in the year he ascended the throne, France had basically no strong enemies. Only France could beat others, and no enemy dared to provoke France. Therefore, François I in history had enough time to integrate the domestic political arena and smoothly control the overall situation. However, in this time and space, because of the intervention of Marin, the time traveler, although Louis XII died more than a month later, France encountered a huge crisis at this time. France was confronting Spain in the Kingdom of Naples. In history, because of France's concessions, Spain monopolized the Kingdom of Naples, and in return, it did not fight with France for the time being. It was not until Ferdinand II died in 1516 that Charles V of the Habsburg family took control of Spain, and Spain continued to fight with France. After all, the Habsburg family in France have a great hatred. Moreover, the Duchy of Burgundy has never been recovered. When Ferdinand II was alive, he took advantage of the Naples issue and did not irritate France too much. But Charles V would not compromise with the French because of the Burgundy issue. Therefore, the two empires fought to the death. Then, Charles V, who had the two major forces of Spain and Austria, won and forced France to ally with the pagan Turkey to protect itself. But in this time and space, because Marin threw out the bait of volcanic ash fertilizer, the two major European powers were stimulated to fight for Naples. Therefore, after the death of Louis XII, his son-in-law François I succeeded to the throne in a state of war. Moreover, there was a lack of support from the courtiers. When the news came back to Auric, Marin laughed uncontrollably. "Ahaha, the old guy is finally dead." Marin was very happy. Although it was delayed by a month than he expected, he was finally dead. As soon as Louis XII died, the unlucky child François I lacked prestige and had no foundation. It can be predicted that France will inevitably be in chaos for a while in a short period of time. This is a good time for Marin to fish in troubled waters. Marin plans to take advantage of the opportunity to make a big deal. What does Marin want to do? Of course, he wants to take the opportunity to weaken France. Marin dare not think about completely destroying France, and it is not in his interest. Because he still needs France to contain Spain. If France falls completely, Spain can easily grow rapidly by stepping on the corpse of France. Therefore, after thinking about it, Marin only plans to pit France once, and does not intend to force France into a dead end. How to pit France? Marin does not intend to go down in person. However, France has many enemies. If Marin does not take action, he can completely instigate England and Austria to take action. The first step is that Marin plans to instigate Gudendorf, a German mercenary general who was previously employed by France, to publicly turn against the water. Of course, it is not considered a public turn against the water, but an announcement of the termination of the employment contract. Moreover, this is based on facts. At the beginning, when Gudendorf signed the employment agreement with France, the employer signed the name of King Louis XII of France, not the Kingdom of France. Marin has repeatedly confirmed this. Now, Louis XII has passed away, that is to say, in the employment contract, the initiator of the contract, that is, Party A, has passed away. In this way, the employment contract is invalid. After all, people can't be employed by dead people. Of course, this is not unsolvable. For example, Gudendorf can find the next king of France to renew the contract. However, the premise of this situation is that Gudendorf is loyal to France, so he will make such a choice. In fact, Ludendorff had been secretly bribed by Emperor Maximilian I. If he was not afraid of damaging his reputation and credit, Ludendorff would have wanted to rebel. After all, he is a mercenary and lives on reputation and credit. If he loses his credibility, no one will be willing to hire his army in the future. Therefore, Ludendorff would rather maintain the status quo and continue to live a infernal affairs life than publicly turn against the water. Louis XII actually knew this before his death. But he was also afraid of pushing too far and directly pushing Ludendorff to the Habsburg family. Therefore, Louis XII had to drag it out like this before. He planned to wait until the things at hand were done before dealing with Ludendorff's affairs. But unexpectedly, before the matter was resolved, Louis XII himself died first. The employer party A was dead, so the employment contract could naturally be terminated. Moreover, it would not affect the reputation of party B. However, Ludendorff himself did not notice that the signature of party A on the contract was Louis XII himself, not the Kingdom of France. Therefore, Marin needed to send someone to remind him. In addition, Marin also had to remind Emperor Maximilian I. Because once Ludendorff ended the employment contract with France, His Majesty the Emperor could completely win over this mercenary army to help him deal with Switzerland and France. Coincidentally, now that the French throne has changed, the newly enthroned François I has an unstable foundation. These 16,000 mercenaries can take the opportunity to cause trouble. Moreover, it can be a big event. Maximilian I jumped for joy after receiving Marin's pigeon letter in Innsbruck. Great, this is really good news. Then, His Majesty the Emperor sent someone to send a letter to Ludendorff, asking him to evacuate Milan and come to Switzerland. Well, accept the public title. After all, Maximilian I had already prepared the baron title and fiefdom for Ludendorff and his son. Although the manor is not big and there are many mountains, after all, it is a Swiss fiefdom. But, it is also a baron. A baron that can be passed down. After receiving the emperor's letter, Ludendorff realized that he now has the right to terminate the contract. Because the employer is dead. So, he did not hesitate because the employer himself died, the employment contract was automatically terminated. Then, he will return to Germany with the army. After the announcement, Ludendorff integrated the army, plundered the city of Milan, and evacuated Milan with sufficient money and food. Chapter 1710, Wholesale Titles and Fiefdoms. The French governor stationed in Milan, Paxiu, was confused. What happened? How can you leave just like that? What should I do if you leave? But he looked through the employment contract of that year, it was true. The employment contract was signed by Louis XII himself, and naturally used his own name. Now that Louis XII has passed away, the employer is dead, and the employee has left, there is nothing wrong. However, Ludendorff's army has left, and Ludovico Sforza will definitely take the opportunity to kill back. So, Paxiu was panicked and wrote to domestic players, asking the country to send reinforcements urgently to defend the Duchy of Milan. However, Paxiu was destined not to wait for that day. Because Ludovico Sforza soon came back with his men. Speaking of which, Ludovico Sforza was supposed to die in 1508. But because of Marin's influence, he changed his fate and is still alive and kicking. It's no wonder. In history, he was captured by the French in 1500 and was imprisoned for several years. He could only die in captivity. In this time and space, because of Marin's help, he was alive and well, and he was not captured by the French. After all, he was only 62 years old and still a strong warrior. When Ludendorff's army arrived at the Muster Valley, he asked Ludovico Sforza to let him go. At the same time, he suggested that he lead his troops back to Milan immediately. Take Milan back before the French send reinforcements. Seeing that Ludendorff's army took away a lot of money and food, Ludovico Sforza's eyes were angry. Of course, he knew that all the money and food were looted from Milan. He wanted Ludendorff to leave all the money and food, but he also knew that it was impossible. Because his several thousand Italian mercenaries could not defeat Ludendorff's 16,000 German mercenaries. In desperation, Ludovico Sforza had to open the gate of the valley fortress and let Ludendorff and his party return to Germany. Afterwards, Ludovico Sforza ordered 7,000 soldiers and horses in the Zimister Valley, leaving only a few hundred to guard the valley fortress. The others all marched towards Milan. Ludovico Sforza also knew about the death of Louis XII, and laughed happily for a long time. Now that Ludendorff's troops have withdrawn, the Duchy of Milan must be empty of troops. If we don't take the opportunity to take it back now, when will we wait? Moreover, Ludovico Sforza is not stupid. He knows that because of the new king's level, the French will not have time to take care of Milan in a short period of time. At least for a few months, he will be safe in Milan. What's more, the French are now competing with Spain for the Kingdom of Naples, and they are unwilling to make more foreign enemies. Maybe he could reach an agreement with the French and get a chance to rule the Duchy of Milan legally. A few days later, Ludovico Sforza's army surrounded the city of Milan. With only a dozen French bodyguards around him, Pasque was naturally unable to resist. Soon, the city of Milan returned to Ludovico Sforza's hands. And Governor Pasque became a prisoner of Ludovico Sforza and a bargaining chip for Ludovico Sforza to negotiate with the French. In Paris, France, after hearing that Ludendorff's army stationed in the Duchy of Milan announced the termination of the employment contract and evacuated Milan, they immediately fell into panic. This happened too suddenly, catching the newly enthroned young François I off guard. Moreover, Ludendorff's reason for terminating the contract was very sufficient. The employer was dead, so they naturally had no need to stay. François I flipped open the original employment contract and took a look. As expected, the signature of Party A was Louis XII himself, not the Kingdom of France. This is a pitfall for the son-in-law. Before he could finish being depressed, the French court was still discussing how many reinforcements to send to Milan, and bad news came from Milan again. The old man Ludovico Sforza came back and recaptured the city of Milan. The French governor stationed in Milan, Baron Pasque, was captured directly. François I was immediately overwhelmed, but what made him even more depressed was still to come. After Ludendorff entered the Graubünden region of Switzerland with 16,000 mercenaries, he originally returned to his hometown in the German region according to the established route. Unexpectedly, halfway through, Emperor Maximilian I showed up in person and blocked the team's way. In fact, this was a routine that Ludendorff and the emperor had already discussed. The emperor personally came forward and stopped the team. Then, persuade Ludendorff to surrender to the emperor. Ludendorff first pretended to be embarrassed, then refused, and the emperor persuaded again. After repeating this several times, Ludendorff finally, reluctantly, agreed. After an hour-long routine rehearsal, the emperor and Ludendorff felt that it was almost done. Then, Ludendorff knelt down and accepted the emperor's recruitment. The emperor, who has always been stingy, was generous this time. He conferred the title of Baron of Marin in the small town of Marin on the east side of Lake Zurich on Ludendorff's illegitimate son, and the fiefdom included 7 or 8 villages. That's not all. Maximilian I had long since come to his senses after being scolded by Marin last time. So this time, he was very generous. He conferred another group of fiefdom knights. In order to win over Ludendorff's army, Maximilian I conferred the title of fiefdom knight on the 12 phalanx commanders under Ludendorff, and gave each of them a small Swiss village as a fiefdom. Anyway, these small Swiss villages were originally ownerless, no lord, and granting them to these phalanx commanders can not only win them over, but also cost nothing. As for the opinions of the local villagers, who dares not to obey? If they don't obey, these phalanx commanders will bring thousands of brothers to kill people. There are only a few hundred people in a small village. Facing thousands of soldiers, the Swiss will have to obey no matter how brave they are. With such a simple move, the backbone officers of this army of 16,000 people were fooled by Maximilian I. Then, these 13 newly promoted nobles also became loyal to the Habsburg family. Maximilian I's calculations were very loud. He thought so these 13 new nobles, especially the 12 phalanx commanders, all have rich experience in military command and combat experience. As long as these 12 officers are won over, they can quickly form a new army based on them in the future. What? You ask where the new soldiers come from? Don't forget, this is Switzerland. As long as the emperor has enough money, he can raise a group of Swiss mountain people in the local area to form a new army. Moreover, it is a strong army. Of course, the emperor also tried his best to win over other people. The emperor announced on the spot that he would hire Ludendorff's army to participate in the Swiss war. If Ludendorff's army can help Frundsberg's main force defeat the Swiss resistance, then he will enfeoff a large number of new nobles according to their military merits. As long as they dare to fight, noble titles and fiefs are waiting for them. This trick really made Ludendorff's soldiers excited. After all, there are 13 role models in front of them. The power of role models is infinite. Xiang Yang's reform was also based on rewarding the first person to carry wood, setting an example, so that people believed in him. Maximilian I enfeoffed a group of nobles in public this time, which gave great stimulation to the soldiers of this army. With this kind of stimulation, there is no need to worry that they will not work hard in the next battle. Chapter 1711 Assassination Plan. The death of Louis XII affected not only the form of the Duchy of Milan, but also the Kingdom of Naples, which also underwent subtle changes at this time. After learning the news of Louis XII's death, Gonzalo de Córdoba kept digging volcanic ash from Mount Vesuvius and sending it back to the country, while trying to persuade Charles III, the Duke of Bourbon, who was defending the city of Naples, to surrender. Upon hearing the bad news of Louis XII's death, Charles III also collapsed a little, and was unwilling to fight, and wanted to surrender and withdraw to his homeland. But his advisor, Charles, the former Duke of Gages and now Count of Nantes, Charles, firmly opposed surrender. Charles believed that the Spaniards had no good intentions. Who knows whether the Spaniards will keep their promise and let them retreat safely to the north. Moreover, the French army in Naples is still strong, and there is a way to smuggle grain along the coast, so there is no need to be afraid. Besides, the volcanic ash in Naples is related to the rise of France, which is very important. If you surrender rashly without the permission of the new king, you will definitely be doomed if you go back, and you may be stripped of your title and imprisoned. Therefore, Charles insisted on defending Naples, and then waited for orders from Paris. After François I ascended the throne, he was also overwhelmed by the chaotic court. Fortunately, a group of favorites left by Louis XII came up in time, flattered him in every way, and tried to show their talents. It happened that François I had no foundation in the court, so he accepted this group of former favorites who flattered him. At least, these favorites of Louis XII were still in high positions at this time, and they were still very useful to him. Before he found new and reliable favorites, he had to rely on this group of people. Then, John Lafitte, who was very popular during the Louis XII period, proposed that France must defend the city of Naples because of the importance of volcanic ash. Then, wait for the autumn harvest and launch a Jedi counterattack. François I was confused. What volcanic ash? Obviously, he didn't know that volcanic ash could be used as fertilizer to increase food production. Then, John Lafitte introduced the role of volcanic ash in detail, and then the newly enthroned Francis I knew this secret. Francis I was not a fool, and naturally would not allow this great opportunity for France to rise to slip away from his hands. Therefore, he sent someone to send a letter to Charles III, Duke of Bourbon, by carrier pigeon to order him to defend the city of Naples and wait for the support of the local army. John Lafitte immediately smiled knowingly, because this was the task assigned to him by Marin, to let France continue to fight the Spaniards. Moreover, the current war situation between the West and France is the most favorable to Marin. At present, the French have only occupied the city of Naples, but have lost the most important Mount Vesuvius, cutting off the source of volcanic ash. Although the Spaniards have occupied the volcanic ash resources of Mount Vesuvius, there are many mountains and few plains in their homeland, and the help brought by volcanic ash is limited. If the French were to gain control of the volcano, it would be terrible. Because France lacks everything except plain arable land. Volcanic ash is only of some help to Spain, but it is even more powerful for France. Therefore, the current state is the best. But Marin always feels that something is wrong. It seems that if this continues, Spain will benefit too much, which is definitely not a good thing. Therefore, he also has to consider secretly helping France at the right time and suppressing Spain appropriately to prevent Spain from being too strong. However, that is a matter for the future. As far as this year is concerned, what Marin has to do is to take advantage of the opportunity of the change of French monarchs to get enough benefits from France. However, he will not let France collapse. In fact, François I's throne as the King of France has not yet been firmly established. Because at this time, there is still an expectation in France that Queen Anne can give birth to a prince. Although Louis XII died, before his death, Louis XII made a villain with Queen Anne every day. Maybe, although Louis XII died, Queen Anne is pregnant with a prince. Therefore, at this time, the French nobles did not immediately support Francis I, but were observing whether Queen Anne was pregnant. However, it would take some time to see, at least 1 or 2 months. Therefore, in the first 2 months, the crown on Francis I's head was actually not secure. Once Queen Anne showed signs of pregnancy, a large number of French nobles would wait for Queen Anne to give birth. If a boy was born, it would be fun. Therefore, before Queen Anne was sure whether she was pregnant, Francis I's throne was actually full of uncertainty. He had no foundation, and if the nobles in the court supported the child that Queen Anne might be pregnant with, his crown would be gone. Based on this, during this period after ascending the throne, Francis I was actually full of anxiety, fearing that his mother-in-law would become pregnant and have a posthumous child or something. In that case, his throne would be over. Only Marin knew that Queen Anne was actually impossible to be pregnant. But the French didn't know, so the French court was actually not united at the moment. Because many people are waiting to see if Queen Anne is pregnant. Taking advantage of this moment, Marin arranged for someone to start doing something very important, killing people. Who is Marin going to kill? Naturally, it is Margaret of Tudor, the daughter of the former King of England who fled to France. After this woman ran to France, she also gave birth to a child named Henry, who was known as the heir to the throne of Scotland and the throne of England, which made Marin very unhappy. You know, Marin planned to make Caesar the future monarch of England and Scotland. The existence of this little boy named Henry is definitely a huge threat. In particular, this child has the support of powerful France. Therefore, Marin must kill this mother and son anyway. However, he didn't know that this little boy named Henry was just a fake, and it was Margaret of Tudor who used it to impersonate. The purpose is to use this little boy as a banner to call on the remnants of the Tudor dynasty and the Scottish forces in exile in France to fight against the current King Edward of England. In fact, if Louis XII had not expected to give birth to a son to unite England, France would have long ago prepared an army to support Margaret and her fake son to counterattack England and Scotland. Now that Louis XII has passed away, France has completely lost the opportunity to marry England. When Francis I reacts and takes control of the situation in France, he will definitely make a fuss about this mother and son. After all, this is a good excuse to interfere in British affairs. But now, Francis I's throne is not yet stable, and the court and the public in Paris are in chaos. It is a good opportunity for Marin to kill Margaret of Tudor. Therefore, Marin asked John/Lafitte to perform well and strive to gain the trust of the new King Francis I. Then, with a certain amount of authority, he transferred the soldiers who protected the mother and son to facilitate the assassins sent by Marin. If you miss this chaotic opportunity and wait until the situation in Paris stabilizes, the chance will be slim. As long as Margaret of Tudor and her fake son Henry are killed, the French will have no bargaining chips to interfere in British affairs in the future. Chapter 1712 Baron Jogl. The biggest problem in assassinating Margaret of Tudor and her fake son Henry is the thousands of French soldiers guarding this mother and son. Margaret of Tudor was very cautious. In order to ensure her own safety, she actually lived directly in a military camp with thousands of people. Although she faced a bunch of rough guys all day long, living deep in the military camp was extremely safe. Even the spy masters of the North Sea Kingdom could not do anything to her. After all, even the most brilliant assassins did not have the courage to assassinate in a military camp with thousands of people. This is the world of normal people, not the world of martial arts. Not to mention facing thousands of soldiers, facing dozens of ordinary soldiers, the strongest assassin master would also kneel. Therefore, Marin's only chance is to let John Lafitte infiltrate the French court and get the opportunity to mobilize those soldiers. Or, find an opportunity for Margaret of Tudor to go out and send someone to intercept her halfway. In fact, when François I ascended the throne, the spies of the North Sea Kingdom were ready to assassinate him and ambushed him halfway. Unfortunately, this woman went to the palace with 300 French soldiers to attend the coronation ceremony. Coincidentally, the military camp was going to send 300 soldiers to the palace to maintain order at the coronation ceremony, and the woman simply went with the soldiers, which also made the assassins lose the opportunity to assassinate. In desperation, Marin could only order John Lafitte to please the newly enthroned François I in every possible way to gain the right to speak in the French court. François I did accept John Lafitte and planned to reuse him. But what made Marin depressed was that because he was not sure whether Queen Anne was pregnant, what François I said was not very effective now. Obviously, François I had given John Lafitte a certain amount of power, but those nobles who originally held real power did not let John Lafitte exercise his power in time. John Lafitte and Marin were so depressed that they wanted to vomit blood. When Queen Anne was proven not to be pregnant and François I established his authority, the situation in Paris would have been relatively stable. At that time, there would be no such good opportunity as now. Now, John Lafitte has been authorized by François I to assist in the management of Paris's city defense and public security. Originally, there should be certain rights to mobilize city defense forces. This includes mobilizing the 1,000 city defense troops that guarded Margaret of Tudor's mother and son. But the problem is that the Count of Cesque, who is currently in charge of the defense of Paris, is currently unwilling to hand over the city defense security of Paris to François I's people at the suggestion of Queen Anne. Obviously, Count Cesque is also waiting for news from Queen Anne to see if Queen Anne is pregnant in a month. Therefore, John Lafitte currently has an empty title, but cannot really assist in the city defense security of Paris, nor can he mobilize the group of city defense troops around Margaret of Tudor. Although in theory John Lafitte will have the opportunity to assassinate the mother and son, after more than a month when he gets the real power, it will not be so easy to send a large number of assassins to sneak into Paris after the situation in Paris stabilizes. After all, once the new king gets the power, the first thing he must do is to get the military power of the capital and run the capital into an iron bucket to ensure his own safety. Therefore, if you want to do it, it is best to do it in the first 2 months. Moreover, John Lafitte heard that Margaret of Tudor was very careful. During the period of the change of French monarchs, she was extremely low-key and basically did not go out, which made John Lafitte and the spies of the North Sea Kingdom stationed in Paris feel helpless. Obviously, Margaret of Tudor was not a fool and knew that this period was a dangerous period. Not only Marin wanted to do it to her, but England also wanted to do it to her. Margaret of Tudor did not know that Marin was going to do it to her, but she knew that King Edward of England must be eager for her death. Therefore, during this period of time, she was very low-key, and she would never go out unless necessary. What should I do? This woman is really difficult. Marin frowned. The assassins obviously dare not break into the military camp of thousands of people. This is not a nonsense martial arts movie, where assassins can fly around. Who dares to break into the military camp of thousands of people? If it were in the wild, Marin could send hundreds of assassins to kill all the soldiers in the military camp. However, this is in the city of Paris. There are at least several thousand defenders in Paris, and tens of thousands of people outside the city. Most of these are elites brought back by Louis XII after his expedition to Italy. Ordinary assassins dare not mess around in front of them. Especially those knights, if it is one-on-one, unless they attack by surprise, those assassins basically can't beat them head-on. And the thousands of people guarding Margaret, mother and son, of Tudor, it is said that there are 10 knights serving as officers, who are very difficult to mess with. The leading officer is said to be a baron. Baron. It seems that this can be used as an article. So, Marin quickly asked someone to inquire about the situation of the commander of the garrison in Paris. Soon, the information was fed back. Baron Jogger, the leader of the city defense army, came from the countryside in western France and was an ordinary baron with no background. But a baron without a background can be a phalanx leader of the Paris city army. He is obviously very capable and not easy to mess with. But Marin interpreted another meaning from it. This guy has no backing and it is difficult to get promoted. If a big guy extends an olive branch to him, as long as he is not a fool, he will generally choose to accept it. In particular, Marin intends to let John Lafitte extend an olive branch to him in the name of François I. Obviously, François I also needs support now. Because the throne is still uncertain, François I also urgently needs the support of the Paris City Defense Force. If there are enough city defense forces in the capital to support him, even if Queen Anne is pregnant, he can control the overall situation. Even, the child that Queen Anne was pregnant with could be eliminated. Therefore, at this stage, François I needed the support of the military. Baron Jogger, a middle-level officer of the Paris City Defense Force who controlled thousands of troops, was obviously a good target for winning over. It would be reasonable for John Lafitte to contact him in the name of helping François I to win over officers. Moreover, Baron Jogger did not dare to refuse. After all, François I was the king. Although the throne was not yet stable, ordinary people did not dare to offend him. What if his throne was stable? Although Queen Anne might be pregnant, she might not be pregnant. Moreover, even if she was pregnant, it might be a girl. Even if it was a boy, it might die. In short, François I was very likely to win in the end, and ordinary people did not dare to refuse his winning over. Even if their positions were wavering and they did not want to accept it, they did not dare to refuse it directly. Before the result from Queen Anne came out, it was necessary for everyone to be servile to François I's winning over. What Marin wanted was Baron Jogger's feigned compliance, and then John Lafitte could use his ultimate move. What ultimate move? What was John Lafitte most famous for? Bordeaux Lafitte Winery. Once the mode of winning over was turned on, John Lafitte could give Baron Jogger a large amount of Lafitte wine in the name of a friend. Even the 1,000-man garrison under the Baron's command. Soldiers are all very fond of alcohol. If John Lafitte sent barrels of wine to this barracks and got the soldiers here drunk, then the opportunity would come. Marin thought of Zhang Fei in Romance of the Three Kingdoms, who was killed quietly by his subordinates after getting drunk. If Marin let John Lafitte use wine to get thousands of city defense troops, including Baron Jogger, drunk, then it would be easy to send assassins to infiltrate and assassinate Tudor's Margaret, mother and son. Chapter 1713, Taverns and Discounts. Maybe, ordinary wine is not easy to get drunk those soldiers who are used to drinking, especially those who drink more. You know, in this era, Europeans drink beer and wine as water. Europeans in this era do not drink white water because they are afraid of getting sick, and they do not take a bath for this reason. But it doesn't matter, Marin is a time traveler, how can he not have some means? The simplest means is to use mixed wine. In modern times, it is easy to get people drunk by playing a prank. Just mix white wine with beer or red wine, it is easy to get drunk, and it is more uncomfortable afterwards. The red wine of Lafitte Winery is not easy to get drunk, and the alcohol content is low, but Marin can make it easier to get drunk. For example, get some medical alcohol from the North Sea country, mix it into Lafitte red wine, and blend it into a higher alcohol content of 20 to 30 degrees. Blending with alcohol, wine is not easy to spoil, and it is also easy to get drunk. In addition, Marin can also find his imperial doctors from the Ming dynasty to prepare some sleeping pills, mix them into the wine, help hypnosis, and make it easier to make Baron Jogel and his men drink. At that time, it will be convenient for the assassin to act. Thinking of this, Marin called Kohler and Saul, two of his trusted men, to perfect the conspiracy plan together. But Kohler raised an objection. Grand Duke, if you do this, you can certainly get rid of Margaret and her son. But then John Lafitte will be exposed. Didn't you say that you want to use his hand to balance the power of France and Spain? If you want to assassinate the mother and son, John Lafitte will be involved. Isn't it a bit uneconomical? Marin thought about it and it was true. John Lafitte had already mixed into the French high-level people and was a key figure. Key figures should be used at the most critical moment. If it is only used in the assassination of Margaret and her son of Tudor, it is indeed a bit of a waste of talent. After all, Margaret's mother and son will only pose a certain threat to England, but it is not big enough to affect the overall situation. It is indeed not worthwhile to sacrifice John Lafitte for them. However, what else can we do? Saul thought about it and said, if we win over Baron Jogel alone, it will naturally be easy to expose John Lafitte. But what if we let John win over several city defense officers at the same time? If we give them all wine, we can't see the degree of deliberateness. As for the assassination, I suggest that hypnotic drugs be put in the wine the night before the assassination. At the same time, arrange for someone with an English background to contact Baron Jogel in advance. In this way, John can put the blame on England afterwards. Just say that the English put drugs in the wine. John himself has no connection with England, and putting the blame on England can also protect himself. When Marin heard this, he nodded repeatedly and thought this was a good idea. Letting the English take the blame is indeed a good way to get John Lafitte out. Moreover, England's motive for assassinating Margaret and her son was much more obvious than Marin's. In other words, the outside world did not think that Marin had any motive to assassinate the mother and son. Moreover, Marin further thought that if he sent John Lafitte to win over Baron Jogger, he could secretly encourage England's spies in Paris to win over Baron Jogger. Even the English could send someone to do it. In this case, it makes more sense. At this time, Kohler also added, "Grand Duke, I have checked the information of that military camp. It seems that the city guards of that military camp sometimes have to be on duty at night, and about 200 or 300 people are sent to patrol at night each time. If there is a night duty, the person in charge of the night duty will not drink randomly. If there are 200 or 300 sober soldiers, then there will be a big problem. Therefore, we must find out whether there is anyone on duty that day." After a pause, Kohler said, "As for the problem of letting Baron Jogel's soldiers drink, I don't think John Lafitte needs to be dispatched at all. I think it would be better to let someone open a tavern next to that military camp. Soldiers love to drink. You send spies from Paris to open a tavern next to that military camp, and use lower prices than other taverns, which will definitely attract all soldiers. After the assassination is completed, this tavern can be abandoned at any time." Marin heard it, his eyes lit up and said, "Yes, this is a good suggestion. However, there must be a tavern next to the military camp. Well. By the way, I can directly purchase the original tavern at a premium, and it can save a lot of time." Marin clapped his hands happily. "As for attracting soldiers in the barracks to drink. This is not difficult for me. Marin is a person from the future, and it is not easy to attract soldiers to drink, promotions and discounts." Marin remembers that in his previous life, once the mall had promotions and discounts, a group of people would gather around. Although most of them are ants, there are also many young people. After all, it is a fool not to take advantage of it. For example, after the tavern changes its owner, he can send someone to change the sign, simply decorate it, and then have a big opening promotion. All drinks are 60% to 70% off. There are no local tyrants these days, and soldiers are generally poor. Seeing such a big bargain to take advantage of, why don't you come up and buy wine? Wait until the right day to do it, add some ingredients to the wine. Thinking of adding ingredients, Marin went directly to the medical room to find Dr. Liu. Although Liu is an expert in gynecology, he also knows other things. Ma Lin wanted this kind of medicine that can make people unconscious after drinking it. Liu said without thinking, "Then I will prescribe some knockout drugs for you, Grand Duke." After hearing this, Ma Lin shook his head, "Dr. Liu, I want to make thousands of people drunk. They definitely don't drink together. The knockout drug works too quickly. If the person drinking in front is found to be knocked out by the drug, will the people behind still drink? So, I want the kind that doesn't feel good at first, but after a while, the after effects will make people drunk. If you want to make people drunk, just mix different kinds of wine. Well, I can modify the knockout drug recipe a little bit to reduce the efficacy. Then, add some sour jujube seeds and other sleep-inducing drugs. In this way, it is easy to get drunk when mixed into wine, and the effect is not as obvious as knockout drugs." Ma Lin thought about it and could only do this. Although the effect is a little weak, at least it won't expose the problem. If it is the kind of knockout drug that makes people faint immediately, anyone can see the problem. This kind of sleep-inducing medicine, combined with mixed wine, is intoxicating but not noticeable. After returning, Marin told Kohler, "Arrange for our people in Paris to take over the tavern near the military camp and hold a big opening promotion with discounts on all drinks. At the same time, transport some alcohol and whiskey, rye ergoto, over there to mix all the wine into mixed wine. At the same time, notify John Lafitte to check the night duty arrangements of the city defense forces and find a suitable date to start." Mixing wine is actually very simple. These days, taverns sell wine in barrels, and most of them are sold in bulk. As long as you mix rye ergoto into the wine when opening the barrel, it will form an intoxicating mixed wine. Add some ingredients, and it will be even easier to get drunk. Chapter 1714 Cooperation with the English. A few days later, the spies of the North Sea Kingdom stationed in Paris completed the acquisition of the tavern. This is a small tavern that mainly sells cheap beer and wine. After all, the consumers of the tavern are the big soldiers in the barracks, and they can't afford to buy good wine. After Kohler's spies took over the tavern, they simply renovated it. Then, wait for the opportunity. During the renovation process, the tavern did not stop selling wine, but opened a small counter outside the door to continue selling loose wine. As for the price, there was no change. After all, it was not the opening period yet. At the same time, a 20-man special forces team led by Nicolas Cage was also on the way to Paris, specializing in assassination. The assassin team led by Cage was very special, because, except for Cage, everyone else was authentic English. This group of English special forces was recruited and trained by Marin 3 years ago. Their mission was to assassinate Margaret of Tudor, who fled to Paris. Their origins were very special, and they were all survivors who had been persecuted by the Tudor dynasty. Their families were killed by the kings or nobles of the Tudor dynasty, and they were the only ones left alive. Therefore, these people hate the Tudor royal family more than anyone else. In fact, several of these 20 people's physical fitness does not meet the requirements of special forces. However, because they have the highest hatred for the Tudor royal family, they were approved by Marin to join as an exception. In addition, Marin also sent a batch of hydrochloric acid and nitric acid to Paris. This is to prepare aqua regia on the spot to corrode the sewer outlet under a city wall not far from the military camp. Once the action begins, a small team will start wearing gas masks to corrode the iron door of the sewer. Then, after the assassination is completed, the special forces who have completed the task will be evacuated. Then, send them to the speedboat on the Seine to escape. In addition, Marin also asked the North Sea military factory to manufacture a batch of iron shell grenades and smoke bombs that were detonated with fuses to help with the assassination. In fact, the power of grenades in this era is very poor. Because black powder has low power, the power of this grenade is about the same as the earthen grenades made by the small workshops of the 8th Route Army during the anti-Japanese war. If the craftsmanship is poor, it can only blow the iron shell into 2 pieces, which can scare a person at most, and it has no great killing power. Even if Marin asked the craftsmen of the North Sea Kingdom to work hard to research and make a shell that is not easy to crack, it can only injure a few people when it explodes. At the same time, it scares people. But that's enough. Because Marin used grenades this time not to kill or injure the enemy, but to scare people. The assassination must be in the middle of the night, and once it happens, it will definitely alarm the Paris defense forces. But no matter how important Margaret of Tudor is, she is not as important as François I himself. At this time, as long as someone detonates a batch of earthen grenades near the Paris palace, the sound will definitely scare the Paris defense forces. In the middle of the night, they must suspect that someone is attacking the palace. At this time, protecting the king must be the priority. Who cares about an exiled foreign nobleman? In other words, the purpose of this kind of black powder grenade with little power is to make a big noise, and then attract the Paris defense army to the royal palace. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the assassination team can also run away. As for the smoke bomb, this is a bit powerful. In addition to the main white phosphorus, extracted from human urine in the simplest way, Marin arranged for the alchemist to extract it. Marin also added chili powder to it. In this way, when the smoke bomb burns, it will also ignite the chili powder and release irritating gas that can make people cry. Such a smoke bomb is actually a combination of smoke bombs and tear gas bombs. Used to stop pursuers, the effect is absolutely first class. However, on the day when Cage and his team arrived in Paris, Memphis, the spy chief of the North Sea Kingdom in Paris, suddenly discovered an important situation about 100 English assassins mixed into Paris and lurked near the military camp. It seems that England has also sent assassins over. Moreover, they sent hundreds of people. Memphis quickly sent a pigeon to report the situation. After thinking about it, Marin quickly ordered Memphis to contact the assassins in England to prevent them from making things worse. The assassins in England did not have as detailed a plan as the North Sea Kingdom, nor did they have so many preparations. If they forcibly launched the assassination, they might not be able to kill Margaret. Moreover, if the assassination failed, the French would definitely strengthen their vigilance. At that time, there would be no chance at all. Therefore, in order to prevent the English from doing bad things, Memphis could only send someone to contact the English assassins. Johnson, the leader of the assassins sent by England, was shocked to learn that they were discovered. But when he learned that the person who came was an ally, he was relieved. Although he was half believing and half doubting in his heart, he knew that if they were enemies, they would be dead as long as they notified the Paris City Defense Force. So he decided to believe Memphis and them. Memphis did not expose the background of the North Sea Kingdom, but claimed to be a descendant of the enemy of the Tudor family. Although Johnson didn't believe it, he didn't care as long as he could kill the target. In fact, the team Johnson brought was a death squad, and none of them planned to go back alive. But they were naturally happy to hear that the people of the North Sea Kingdom could open the iron gate of the sewer and take them out safely. After all, no one wants to die in vain. In addition, they were even happier to hear that Memphis and others could guarantee that most of the defenders would be drunk on the night of the assassination. However, Johnson's opinion was even more ruthless. Why use hypnotic drugs? Wouldn't it be better to directly use chronic poison? Anyway, the French are dead. Memphis was stunned, but soon felt that it made sense. So, he gave this opinion to Marin. Marin was also stunned. Yeah, why can't I bear to kill those French soldiers? Or it was too much influenced by the humanistic thoughts of later generations. He remembered the French are enemies, so there is no need to be so merciful. Before, he was still worried. Even if he added sleep-inducing drugs, if there was a shout of killing in the middle of the night, these people would wake up easily. At worst, they would be pushed awake by their companions. However, if we follow the British, we can be more ruthless and use a slow poison that will last for several hours to directly poison the French city guards. At that time, even if there is a big noise, the assassins will not be afraid of being besieged. Therefore, Marin adjusted the plan again and changed to direct poisoning. Moreover, this slow poison that will last for several hours is easier to find and was found quickly. Even the imperial physician from the Ming dynasty was not used. Because the alchemists in Europe can make it. In addition, Marin also adjusted the action plan. Since the English sent hundreds of assassins, Cage's men don't have to take risks. Marin plans to let Cage and his men carry out the harassment plan. It is to detonate grenades near the royal palace of Paris to make a big noise and attract the attention of the city guards. Then, they will hide in the underground secret room of the house prepared in advance. What? You said you are worried that they will be found by the French afterwards. In fact, with the cover of the sewer exit, the French will think that the enemy has escaped from the city. With the English assassins diverting the French's attention, Cage and his men would be much safer. Moreover, the North Sea spies had not been operating in Paris for nothing over the years, so hiding dozens of people was not a problem at all. Chapter 1715, Rewards and Purchase Restrictions. The assassination by the English this time was a desperate struggle. After all, Edward hoped that the rebel organization in England would collapse, so that England could have a stable domestic environment. If Margaret of Tudor, mother and son, were killed, the domestic resistance forces in both England and Scotland would have no spiritual support and no need to resist. This time, England sent a full 100 people, all of whom were fighting masters, and all of them were dead men. They all used sailor scimitars and were very good at using scimitars to fight in a small space. To put it bluntly, they are masters among sailors and a specialty of England with many pirates. These people came to Paris with the determination to die. In order to let them have no worries, Edward promised that if they died in battle, their sons would be canonized as fief knights. Moreover, as long as the heirs did not die out, the title would not be taken back. Of course, the premise is that they must successfully kill Margaret and her son. However, they don't really want to die. It would be best if they could successfully escape while completing the task. Therefore, when the North Sea spies contacted them, they agreed to cooperate. In addition to the chance to survive, the North Sea promised to use poisoned wine to knock down the city guards in the barracks, which was also the main reason for their agreement to cooperate. After all, if they stormed the barracks of 1,000 people, the probability of failure and the death of all of them was very high. However, they mistook the mysterious North Sea spy organization for the Spanish. Because the English felt that only the Spanish had the ability to have such a powerful underground force in France. However, Memphis was unwilling to reveal his identity, and the leader of the English assassins, Shaw, didn't care. Anyway, as long as the mission was completed. However, Shaw and his English assassin partners were skeptical about whether Memphis could knock down all the city guards with drugged wine. Because there were thousands of people, it was unlikely that they would drink the same wine at the same time, right? Moreover, even if these thousands of city guards drank the wine in this tavern, the drugged wine would only be provided on the day of the action, and not everyone would drink it. What if someone bought the wine the day before? Memphis smiled at this question, very confident, and just let Shaw wait and see. About 10 days later, because he often went in and out of the city guard headquarters, John Lafitte finally calmly wrote down the city guard patrol duty list and sent a message to Memphis. Memphis took action immediately, and then the tavern next to the barracks, renamed God of War Tavern, reopened grandly. The new tavern owner Bedels publicly stated that the God of War Tavern was dedicated to serving the soldiers of the nearby city guard barracks. As long as you bring a military license plate, you will enjoy the benefits of selling alcohol at the God of War Tavern within the first 10 days of the tavern opening. The discount is 30% off, but it is limited. Each person is limited to £1 per day. 1 pound is less than 1 kilogram. Under normal circumstances, it is difficult to get drunk with this amount of beer or wine. However, the wine in the God of War Tavern is obviously different. The tavern directly adopted the blending method. Before selling alcohol every time, whether it is beer or wine, it is mixed with ergotu. It is definitely not durable to store in this way, but it is okay, because the city guards will drink it as soon as they buy it back, and it will not be kept for a long time. The measure of limiting the purchase to 1 pound each time is to prevent the city guards from buying a lot at a time and drinking it slowly. The amount of 1 pound of wine is calculated. If ergotu is not mixed in, this amount of beer or wine can basically be drunk as a beverage and will not be kept until the next day. In this way, when poisoning the next day, there is no need to worry that these guys will not drink the poisoned wine of the day. Of course, there are problems with doing this. For example, those city guards who have a high alcohol tolerance made trouble in the tavern and even beat people because they were dissatisfied with the tavern's limited quantity. In this regard, Memphis strictly ordered the employees in the tavern if they are beaten, they will be beaten, but never increase the quantity. As for the reason, it is said that the new wine supply channel has not been negotiated yet, and there is not much inventory, so it can only be limited for the time being. When the new supply channel is negotiated, it will be open for 3 days, and the same 30% discount will be given. Relying on this gimmick, the city guards in the nearby military camps calmed down after making trouble a few times. Moreover, they were very satisfied with the beer and wine with ergoto added provided by the new tavern. This mixed wine with greatly increased strength may not suit the taste of those nobles and priests, but it definitely suits the taste of these rough soldiers. These soldiers are eager to drink strong liquor every meal. However, because of limited salary, the price of strong liquor is often very expensive. Therefore, they can only drink beer as light as water or inferior wine. But cheap wine is really not good to drink. For example, the cheapest beer of 1 denier per gallon is almost all sour beer, which is very difficult to drink. Wine is more expensive, and the cheapest one costs 3 deniers per gallon. Generally, only officers of noble origin will drink wine. Ordinary soldiers usually only drink inferior beer. No other reason, no money. This time, the God of War Tavern can be said to be quite conscientious. You can buy a gallon of beer mixed with ergoto for only 0.75 deniers. Moreover, it is good beer without sourness. However, the tavern has a daily limit, and only allows 1 pound, about 1/10 of a gallon, to be purchased at a time, which makes everyone very unhappy. But what these big-headed soldiers didn't expect was that this mixed wine tasted good, but the after-effect was quite strong. Most of those who couldn't drink well had no problem at first after drinking this mixture of beer and liquor, but soon they became drunk and passed out. But this group of reckless big-headed soldiers loved this state of being drunk to death the most. After all, living in the barracks without the company of wives and children, it is very happy to be drunk. For 5 consecutive days, the whole barracks was full of drunkards, and only a few people with good alcohol tolerance could stay sober. At first, the leader of this city guard, Baron Jogl, was a little nervous and felt something was wrong. So, he didn't get drunk. But after 5 days, nothing happened, so he relaxed. On the 6th day, the God of War Tavern suddenly announced that it would be closed for 1 day, because the inventory was used up and it would take the next day to transport alcohol from other places. The soldiers in the barracks were not happy with this. They kicked open the door of the tavern and entered the wine cellar to search. As a result, they did not find any wine. The tavern owner Baders smiled and said that once the new wine is delivered tomorrow, it will be available for 3 days without purchase limit. Now, these soldiers left with great expectations. But they didn't know that the god of death was coming. The 7th night was the day when the barracks had no night duty. All the means in the past few days were to wait for this day. Moreover, the deliberate closure on the 6th day was also for the action on the 7th night. Because Marin needed the soldiers in the barracks to drink up the wine in stock first. Otherwise, they would not drink the poisoned wine of the day immediately. Moreover, there would be a discount supply on the 2nd day after only 1 day. In this way, the soldiers in the barracks will wait patiently for a day and will not go to other places to buy wine. Because they had become picky drinkers in the past few days, and it was hard for them to get used to ordinary wine. Around 5 o'clock in the afternoon of the next day, several horse-drawn carriages brought a lot of wine barrels from outside the city, which immediately alarmed all the soldiers in the barracks. The wine is finally here. Today's supply is open, and the price is still the same. This is a good deal. Many old drunkards couldn't help licking their lips. Then, the soldiers swarmed in, scrambling to buy the new wine, and each person bought more than a gallon. In order to wait for today, many soldiers borrowed money from their comrades who had more money yesterday. Don't push. Don't push. Come one by one, please show your soldier badge. The guys in the tavern were sweating and serving these soldiers in a hurry. Even the commander, Baron Jogl, bought 2 gallons of wine. Of course, he went through a special channel, and ordinary soldiers didn't dare to say anything. After 2 or 3 hours of busy work, the people in the tavern took a break. At this time, the tavern owner whispered to a person who was supervising the whole process, "Have you counted? How many people? Did they all come to buy?" The accountant nodded. Almost, among the 1,000 people, only 35 people didn't come to buy. I think they are probably not in the barracks. This is a very normal situation. Such a large barracks is often not fully staffed unless it is a critical period. Because there are always soldiers who ask for leave to go out for business or go home to visit relatives. In particular, the military discipline in this era is not as strict as in later generations. It is normal for someone to be absent. Moreover, it doesn't matter even if those 35 people are there and don't drink. Hundreds of English assassins would chop them into minced meat. Bardels, the tavern owner, breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Okay, mission accomplished, let's retreat." Chapter 1716, Assassination in the Camp. Bedels only took the accountant and quietly evacuated. As for the other guys in the tavern, they were just temporary hires, not spies from the North Sea Kingdom, so Bedels didn't care about them. After going around in circles, Bedels came to a low house in the nearby slums and whispered to the half-open window, "Everything is normal, I bought the wine with added ingredients." The ingredients added to the wine are the strange poison developed by the Italian alchemist Furin, half-day death powder, which means that you will die half a day after being poisoned. Of course, there is an antidote for this poison. However, if you don't know that you are poisoned, there is no solution. Moreover, when the poisoned person dies, the heart stops suddenly, and it will not cause bleeding from all 7 orifices immediately, but blood will flow out of the mouth and nose after a few hours, which meets Marin's requirements. However, this poison tastes weird. If it is added to clean water, it is easy to drink something wrong. Moreover, the color of this poison is bright red, which makes people know that there is something wrong at a glance. But if it is added to mixed wine, it is not very obvious. Because beer mixed with whiskey is turbid in color, and no abnormality can be seen. The spiciness of rye ergoto can also cover up the strange smell of poison to a certain extent. In addition, Marin had someone add something to the non-toxic mixed wine before, so that the normal non-toxic mixed wine and the poison mixed wine taste exactly the same and difficult to distinguish. Just like at the beginning, Baron Jogel was shocked after drinking the mixed wine, thinking that the wine was poisonous. In fact, it was a deliberately wrong taste. After a few days, nothing happened in the barracks, and Baron Jogel relaxed his vigilance. Unexpectedly, people really poisoned this time. In the evening, because of this big reward, the soldiers in the barracks drank a lot, and many people didn't need to be poisoned, and they lay on the ground drunk and couldn't get up. Looking at the carnival soldiers, Margaret of Tudor in a small building inside the barracks frowned, feeling something was wrong. But the soldiers in the camp drank a lot these days, and nothing happened, so she didn't care, but took the 5-year-old Henry back to the house to rest. To be honest, Margaret didn't like the noisy atmosphere in the military camp. However, for the sake of her life, she had to hide in it with her fake son Henry. At least, the assassins didn't dare to break into the military camp of 1,000 people. In the middle of the night, the noisy military camp had already quieted down. Only the dozen soldiers guarding the camp gate drank less at night. After all, they were responsible for guarding the safety of the camp gate. At the same time, they warned their companions. However, although they drank less, they drank after all, and they were also poisoned. At most, the degree of poisoning was a little shallow. At this time, in an attic not far from the gate of the military camp, Memphis and the leader of the English assassins, Shaw, were carefully observing the situation of the soldiers at the gate of the military camp. Although these people were not poisoned, they would eventually explode. Generally speaking, if they drank less, those who drank more would explode earlier, and the poison in their bodies would explode later. When their poison also exploded, there would be almost no living people in the camp. At that time, it was a good time to take action. At the same time, another group of people, after temporarily configuring aqua regia, put on gas masks and glass bottles filled with aqua regia, and quietly went to the iron gate of the sewer near the military camp. More than an hour later, the agreed cat's cry came from the iron gate of the sewer, letting Memphis and Shore know that the iron gate of the sewer had been taken care of. After another hour or so, suddenly a city guard guarding the camp gate fell down without any warning, scaring his companions beside him. "Zizou, what's wrong with you?" The French guards who had not yet erupted in the poisonous atmosphere gathered around to check the situation. When Memphis and Shore saw this, their hearts tightened. Memphis whispered, "Quick, send someone up to kill these people." At this time, there were only 4 people at the gate, and there were 2 groups of guards guarding the second gate inside. Shore immediately let out a special dog bark, and a group of English assassins who were best at sneaking in and assassinating suddenly emerged from the darkness and covered the other 3 guards who were looking down at their unlucky comrades. Then, the knife fell. But this fight still made a lot of noise. The 7 or 8 people guarding the second door heard the noise, and someone asked through the door, "What happened outside?" At this time, an English assassin who knew French answered in French, "Zido fainted." "What? Zidane fainted?" Obviously, this was the friend of the guard named Zidane. There was anxiety in his voice. However, the other guard at the second door was a little confused. "Who are you? Your voice is a little strange." Obviously, he was doubting the identity of the English assassin. After all, there were only 4 guards outside the door, but the assassin's voice was not like any of them. Hearing this question, the assassin who knew French was a little confused and didn't know how to answer for a while. At this time, Memphis, who was already close to the gate with Shaw, heard the question from inside, and then imitated the voice of the guard who had just said, "What happened to Zidane?" and said, "Stop talking nonsense, Zidane's head is bleeding, open the door quickly, let's carry Zidane in to find a doctor." "Larry?" "Okay, I'll open the door now." Obviously, the unlucky guy who was killed was called Larry. The people inside recognized this voice, and then the first camp gate was hurriedly opened. "Who are you?" After opening the door, the French guards who saw hundreds of people in black were stunned for a moment, and then they were ready to shout. Unfortunately, the English assassins would not give them a plan. Just when he was about to shout, the leader of the English assassins, Shaw, threw a flying knife and directly stabbed the throat of the French soldier who opened the door, making him unable to make a sound. Then, a group of black-clad English assassins swarmed in and quickly chopped down the 7 or 8 people at the second gate. At this time, a scolding voice came from the second door. "Who is it? How dare you break into the military camp?" Obviously, there was another person inside. But before the English assassin could make any move, the voice inside suddenly changed. "Ouch, my stomach hurts. Help." Then, the guy's voice became weaker and weaker. Obviously, this guy was unlucky enough to be poisoned. Then, an English assassin who was good at climbing, climbed up the wall with a flying claw, flipped in, and opened the second door. Afterwards, a group of people ignored the handsome men in the military camp and rushed to the small villa where Margaret of Tudor and her fake son Henry lived behind the camp. After seeing the English assassins break in, Memphis did not follow them in, but left the military camp with a dozen men. "My lord, where are we going?" a spy from the North Sea asked. "We go outside the wall behind the military camp to prevent Margaret from escaping." Marin had given instructions, saying that Margaret of Tudor had escaped from the Edinburgh Palace by hanging down the wall. Therefore, we need to be on guard against this woman doing the same thing this time. The noise made by Shaw and his group was too loud, and finally woke up dozens of French soldiers. These people resisted hastily, and although they were quickly hacked to death, they also made a lot of noise. What happened? Hearing the screams from outside, Margaret in the villa suddenly woke up. Soon, she judged that it was not good. "Someone came to kill me." Then, she immediately put on her coat, and even ignored the 5-year-old Henry on the bed, and ran straight to the back of the second floor of the villa. There, she hid a ladder. Ignoring the distress of her fake son Henry behind her, Margaret of Tudor quickly set up a ladder between the second floor and the wall behind the barracks. Then, she climbed over. Afterwards, she put away the ladder, stretched the ladder out from the top of the barracks wall, and dropped it to the ground. After setting up the ladder, she climbed down along the ladder. Before coming down, she looked around, and it seemed that there was no movement. But when she landed, suddenly a dozen men in black rushed out from the shadows. Obviously, this group of people had been hiding in the shadows on the side before. "You've been waiting for a long time, Your Highness Margaret." Memphis's gloomy voice came. Chapter 17 Force Majeure. "You." Tudor's Margaret's eyes were full of fear and despair. Then, she wanted to call for help. However, before she could shout, Memphis flashed forward like a ghost and cut Margaret's throat with a dagger. Memphis was a person who was personally taught by Marin. Marin once emphasized a sentence: "The villain died because of talking too much." Therefore, Memphis was very straightforward. The reason why he said that sentence before was actually to confirm it. If it was not Margaret herself, she would probably deny it subconsciously. If it was the real owner, she would not deny it subconsciously, but would have other reactions. Moreover, seeing that the other party seemed to want to shout, Memphis could only act directly. Before he acted, he was 70% sure that he met Margaret herself. After cutting Margaret's throat, Memphis grabbed Margaret's hair, and then carefully identified her face in the faint moonlight. He had already observed Margaret in the barracks through a telescope on a high building, so he naturally knew what Margaret looked like. Seeing that the target was confirmed, he added another knife and cut Margaret's neck completely. Just as they were about to retreat, a little boy's scream came from the villa. Obviously, the so-called Prince Henry was killed by the English assassins. However, at this time, the group of English assassins were panicking. "Where is that woman?" The panicked voices of the English assassins came from the villa across the wall. Obviously, they didn't find Margaret. Memphis quickly sent someone to climb up the wall from the ladder that Margaret put down, and said in a low voice, "Margaret came out and was killed by us." Shaw was relieved when he heard it, and then hurriedly said, "Brother, please throw the ladder over, we want to get out from here." The battle in front had alarmed the surrounding area. It is estimated that the city guards from other military camps on duty at the gate will come over. Moreover, this place is far away from the gate of the military camp, it is inconvenient to go out, and it is easy to be blocked by the French city guards who heard the noise. Therefore, they had better retreat from the backyard wall. After Memphis agreed, the spy on the wall lifted up the ladder and threw it in. He himself jumped off the wall and prepared to retreat with Memphis. After leaving a man to guide Shore and his men, Memphis led his men to retreat first. However, it was not the direction of the sewer iron gate, but the direction of the city. After the English assassins basically climbed out of the wall, the man who was left as a guide led the English assassins to the sewer iron gate while making dog barking sounds. Then, after a few special cat and dog barks, 500 meters away, a person lit a firecracker in the shadows. Bang, a loud noise went up to the sky, and also attracted the attention of a city guard who had just entered the gate of the military camp and came to support after hearing the shouting and killing. However, the location of the firecracker was opposite to the direction of the sewer iron gate. The captain of the city guard looked up at the sky, sent out a team and said, "You, go to the direction of the explosion. I guess there are enemies over there." But just as he finished speaking, Cage and his 20 men who were lurking near the French royal palace received the signal and began to blow the fuse tied to their arms, lighting the black powder grenades and smoke bombs in their hands. Boom 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 dash, a series of explosions came. The city guards of the entire Paris city were awakened, except for the unlucky one in the poison barracks. No, someone is attacking the palace. Come on, go to the palace to protect the king. At the city guard headquarters, Count Cesc gave an anxious and loud order. The explosion came from the direction of the palace, where the king and queen lived. In addition, there was Queen Mother Anne, to whom Cesc was loyal. They are all extremely valuable and cannot afford to be harmed. Just when all the city guards in Paris were heading towards the royal palace, Cage, who had left grenades and smoke bombs on the ground, and his 20 men, led by the spies of the North Sea Kingdom stationed in Paris, quietly withdrew in several groups. They will be taken to several extremely hidden secret passages and secret rooms. It is very difficult to be found. What? Queen Margaret and Prince Henry were assassinated? The soldiers in the barracks responsible for protecting him were poisoned, and more than half of them died. In the city guard headquarters, Count Cesc was shocked when he heard the report from the soldier sent by the city guard who rushed to the assassination scene. This is a huge matter. A barracks of thousands of people, most of them were poisoned, and the rest were said to be half dead. It is definitely a huge matter. Coupled with Margaret of Tudor and her fake son, who are valued by France, this matter is simply a big deal. You know, this is Paris, the capital of France. It was unbelievable that such a big thing happened. Afterwards, he, the commander of the city guard, could not escape the blame. But after thinking for a while, Count Cesc's face changed drastically. Oh no, we have fallen into the enemy's trap. Europeans did not know the idiom, luring the tiger away from the mountain, but they understood the meaning. Hurry up, send people to the Northwest City Guard camp to search for the assassin. Only by catching the assassin can he reduce his guilt. Otherwise, he would lose his position as the commander-in-chief of the Paris City Guard. When the City Guard army surrounded the City Guard barracks in the Northwest City, the City Guard soldiers soon discovered the sewer iron gate that was damaged by the mysterious force. It seems that the enemy has escaped. Send out all the scouts on horseback to search from this sewer exit. Arrest any suspicious person immediately. Kill anyone who dares to resist. At this point, Count Cesc knew that he was fooled, but he had no choice but to send light cavalry out of the city to chase, hoping to catch a few enemies so that he could report to the palace. At this time, after leaving the sewer iron gate, 99 English assassins supported a wounded man, who was injured by the city guard soldiers who had not yet taken effect of the poison, and came to the Seine River. They boarded the speedboat that the North Sea spy gate had prepared long ago, and quickly left the direction of Paris and drove quickly downstream of the Seine. However, this batch of ships was originally prepared for Cage's 20 special forces. So, there are some problems with the quantity. The ships prepared before were not enough to carry 100 people. Afterwards, the North Sea spy gate hastily added a few more boats. However, some of them were not fast speedboats. After dawn, all the people on the speedboats evacuated to a safe place to land, and hid in the secret base that the North Sea Kingdom had prepared long ago. However, among the additional ships, 2 small boats were caught up by the French ships that followed because of their slow speed. The 20 English assassins on the ship saw that there was no hope of escape, and had to choose to commit suicide with helplessness on their faces. For the king. The 20 assassins committed suicide on the spot with different expressions. They were also helpless, because their sons and other family members were under the control of King Edward. If they died, their sons would also be knighted. But if they were captured or even betrayed, their family members would not survive. Anyway, the assassination was successful, and even if they died, their sons could be knighted. So, they all committed suicide resolutely. Count Cesc was also relieved after seeing the 20 bodies. He was afraid that he would not catch anyone, otherwise, he would not be able to report to the task. Although these 20 bodies are not valuable, they are still a report. Moreover, their cries before suicide were obviously in English. No one knows that they were sent by Edward. Now, as long as he puts the blame on the British, he will not have to bear the main responsibility. After all, there is nothing wrong with his arrangement. However, who would have thought that a city guard soldier in a military camp could be poisoned? If he understood the vocabulary of later generations, he would tell the French government and the public that this was force majeure. Chapter 1718, Collecting Termites. It was indeed force majeure. After François I learned the news, although he was extremely angry, he did not dare to really turn his face. Because France had just experienced a change of monarchs at this time, the domestic situation was unstable, and it was not appropriate to make a big move. What's more, France and Spain were fighting at this time. It would be too unwise to provoke England at the same time. Therefore, François I planned to endure it for the time being and wait for an opportunity to settle accounts in the future. Obviously, François I's choice was correct. Not only did he think so, but the French courtiers also thought so. After all, it was indeed too unwise to provoke two major powers at the same time. What's more, the Habsburg family also had a bad relationship with France. But it was not okay not to express it at all. After all, the face of the first power in Europe still had to be saved. Therefore, François I sent envoys to London to express his anger. Of course, they could only attack the poisoning of thousands of city guards. As for the matter of Margaret and her son, it was not easy to publicly question England. Thousands of soldiers were killed. This is no small matter. It is enough to provoke a national war. But France cannot fight on two fronts at this time. Therefore, even if it is extremely angry, it must endure it. Otherwise, the consequences are unpredictable. If England fights France alone, it can only rely on the Channel to protect itself. However, now the main force of France is fighting with Spain. Therefore, the threat from the English is much greater. In fact, the purpose of the French government and the public is very simple: first send envoys to wrangle with England and delay time. Moreover, seek compensation from England. For example, compensation of 300,000 gold coins or something, 300 gold coins per person, can also give an explanation to the families of the deceased, and France can also regain a lot of face. Unfortunately, this idea is doomed to fail. Edward is not a local tyrant like Marin. Years of war, plus England has not yet engaged in ocean trade, the country is very poor, how can there be so much money for compensation? Besides, the poisoning was not done by the English. So, Edward said poisoning has nothing to do with England, we will not pay money, and we don't need to apologize. What Edward said was actually the truth, but the French didn't believe it. The French insisted that it was England who did it. Then, the two countries began a long dispute. At the same time, the angry François I ordered to start secretly building warships and train sailors with Marin's method of suspending oversized wooden boards, preparing to one day attack the hateful British. In order to avoid being hit by the English navy, the French built ships and trained sailors in the inland rivers this time. After the training is completed, they will be pulled to the English Channel to fight. Originally, this plan was confidential. But unfortunately, François I didn't know that he had a trusted nobleman, John Lafitte, who was actually a lurking enemy spy. Therefore, this plan was leaked from the beginning. On the third day, Marin got the detailed plan of France to build ships and train sailors in the inland river. Oh, you've learned your lesson this time. Building ships in inland rivers is indeed a little difficult to attack and destroy. This time, France plans to set up 3 shipyards in the middle reaches of the Seine River, the middle reaches of the Loire River flowing through Nantes, and the middle and lower reaches of the Garonne River flowing through Bordeaux, to build 200-ton warships for crossing the English Channel in the future. François I was very ambitious. He knew that if he ascended the throne, it would be impossible to unite England. If he wanted to annex England, he could only rely on force. If France could win the Italian War and obtain a stable source of volcanic ash, it would have the strength to annex England in a few years. The premise is that there would be enough warships by then. It would be impossible to continue building ships on the northern or western coasts. The English would definitely come and destroy them when they saw them, which would be a waste of effort. Building ships on the Mediterranean coast would not work either. The Spanish would not sit idly by. They might learn from the British and destroy the shipbuilding centers on the Mediterranean coast. Even the Rhone River, a large river flowing into the Mediterranean, could not have a shipyard. Because, even if ships were built on the Rhone River, they could not escape the encirclement of Spanish warships when they sailed into the Mediterranean. Even if they were lucky enough not to be discovered when they went out to sea, it would be difficult to pass through the Strait of Gibraltar and reach the northern coast. After all, the Strait of Gibraltar is too narrow, and it is easy for the Spanish to block the strait. Therefore, Francis I only built 3 shipyards on the Seine River that flows into the English Channel and the Loire and Garonne rivers that flow into the Atlantic Ocean, in order to avoid attacks from the English while having the opportunity to sail the ships out to the northern coast to start a war. Obviously, because of the hidden location and confidentiality issues, the English did not know the plans for the 3 shipyards. Even if they knew, they could not enter the inland river to destroy the shipyard. After all, the inland river could not accommodate too many warships, and the French also sent heavy troops to protect it, and planned to set up artillery batteries to guard the shipyard. In this way, even if the British knew, they could not destroy the shipyard. But Marin already knew. For the safety of his son's future union with England, Marin felt that he should do something. If you want to destroy a ship, the best way is to get more shipworms to chew the ship. But this time the French shipyard is in the inland river, so they can't use shipworms, so. By the way, use termites. Marin suddenly thought that termites are also something that is extremely harmful to wood. After the ship is launched, it may be difficult for termites to dive to chew the ship. But what about before the ship is built? Before the ship is built, the wood for shipbuilding must be piled up on the shore in large quantities. At this time, if there are a large number of termites chewing those woods, it seems that this is a good idea. So Marin called Kohler and assigned him a task: send people to various places and even other countries to secretly collect termites. Then, put them in metal cages and feed them with wood. Then, quietly take them to the 3 French inland shipyards that have not yet been built. During the French shipbuilding process, the North Sea Congress sent spies to sneak into the place where the shipyards placed wood, and released the termites in the cages at night to let the termites eat away at the stacked shipbuilding wood. As long as there are enough termites, the French will definitely suffer heavy losses in the wood they have piled up. Shipbuilding wood is difficult to collect. In addition to strict requirements on size, it is also required to be air-dried for at least 1 or 2 years before it can be used as shipbuilding wood. If a large amount of shipbuilding wood is destroyed by termites, it will definitely not be able to be used for shipbuilding. By then, Francois I will definitely be so angry that he will vomit blood. After all, the price of shipbuilding wood is not low. If it is destroyed too much by termites, the loss must be an astronomical figure. Moreover, the French would never have thought that there are people in this world who would collect termites and use them against their shipyards. Chapter 1719 The Emperor's Jealousy. Frankly speaking, even if Marin sent people to release termites, he couldn't stop the French from building ships. After all, termites can't chew up all the wood. But Marin didn't want to completely stop the French from building ships, but to greatly increase the cost of French shipbuilding. For example, it obviously takes X cubic meters of wood to build a ship, but because of the damage of termites, the French need to prepare twice or even 3 times more wood. Then, the cost of French shipbuilding has been greatly increased. Cost may not have much impact in later generations. After all, officials in later generations are very rich and can afford some losses. But this era is different. The Kingdom of France, a top European power, has an annual fiscal revenue of only more than 1.2 million gold coins, which is not as good as Venice or the North Sea Kingdom. France is a large country with many officials and troops, and its fiscal expenditure is very huge. Among them, the consumption of warhorse feed for the army is the biggest of many consumptions. Therefore, the French don't have much spare money. The increase in shipbuilding costs will force France, which is not well off, to reduce the number of ships. At that time, if there are not enough ships, it will be difficult to pose a real threat to England. In short, this is a very hidden soft knife. There is no threat, but the effect is good. The most important thing is that the French are still unaware. Why did Marin weaken France at this time? It's very simple. He is paving the way for Caesar to gain England. Whether it is Louis XII or Francis I, they are ambitious and covet England. 2 generations of French emperors have been plotting England for a long time. If Marin goes to marry England at this time, the French will definitely be furious. The French are obviously very clear about the secret that Edward is no longer able to have children. Therefore, the marriage between Caesar and Princess Margaret means that they will be able to unite England in the future. But for the French who have long been plotting England, Caesar's acquisition of England is absolutely a disastrous consequence. Because England's navy is already very strong, and the North Sea navy is not weak. In particular, the North Sea army is still very strong. If England and the North Sea are united, France will not be able to move England in the future. Therefore, if Caesar and Princess Margaret were to marry, France, who was angry and humiliated, might not be able to cross the sea to attack England, but it was definitely able to attack the North Sea Kingdom, which was also located on land. Marin was not prepared for a decisive battle at this time, and there were only 30,000 to 40,000 people on the mainland. If the enemy was only France, Marin was confident that he could resist. However, if the German princes also joined in, it would be dangerous. Therefore, before Caesar and Princess Margaret married, Marin believed that France must be severely beaten to keep a low profile for a while. In this way, there was no way to interfere with the marriage between Caesar and Princess Margaret. When France recovered, the matter was already settled, and they could not change it. In fact, geographically speaking, England posed a greater threat to France than Spain. Although Spain was a land power, it was far in the southwest. The core area of France was in the Paris Basin in the north, which was beyond the reach of the Spanish. The English could go up the Seine and attack Paris directly. Of course, this was only in theory. Because the English army was so scum, it could only harass the northern and western coasts of France, and had no ability to invade Paris. Because even if it invaded Paris, the English army was no match for the French knights. But the French were also afraid that England would suddenly have a strong army. Apart from anything else, if it merged with the North Sea Kingdom, it would definitely be a dual power of sea and land, and it would have the ability to directly threaten Paris. So, if the North Sea Kingdom merged with England, it would really overstimulate France, and Marin had to be on guard. The best choice is to take advantage of the current internal instability of the French, so that the English can unite with Spain and Austria to severely cut France and beat the French honestly. Originally, this opportunity was actually very large. For example, Maximilian I added 16,000 troops of Ludendorff. If Ludendorff's 16,000 people could be transferred to the Netherlands and attack Paris from the direction of Belgium in the future. At the same time, England also mobilized a large army from its homeland to join them and attack Paris together, which would definitely bring bad luck to France. You know, Paris has not been besieged before. Back then, the bold Charles united the Duke of Berry, the Duke of Bourbon and the Duke of Brittany to form the Public Welfare Alliance against Louis XI, surrounded Paris, and almost succeeded in overthrowing the rule of Louis XI. If Louis XI had not divided and won over the Public Welfare Alliance, in time, causing conflicts within it, the Valois dynasty might have been overthrown by the bold Charles. Moreover, attacking Paris from Belgium is a smooth journey. As long as the Habsburg family can send out 16,000 troops, plus England can gather 20,000 to 30,000 people, they can push all the way to Paris. Not to mention destroying France, they can definitely force France to sign a humiliating alliance. After all, the main force of the French army is still in Naples, and the French will definitely be unable to resist if they launch an attack from the north at this time. However, Maximilian I has his own plans. His Majesty the Emperor does not believe in the English's land warfare capabilities, and he hopes to annex Switzerland first while the French are too busy to take care of other things. When the western part of Switzerland is annexed, the territory of the Habsburg family will be connected. By then, Austria, Tyrol, Switzerland and Franche-Comté will be connected into a whole region, which is more conducive to rule. Moreover, Maximilian I actually has his own little thoughts. He is a little jealous that Spain can swallow the rich kingdom of Naples. Although they are allies, the emperor is not happy that his allies can take all the benefits. In addition, if Spain takes the opportunity to completely defeat France, then it will be hard to say whether Spain is an enemy or a friend in the future. Therefore, Maximilian I thinks it is best to let France and Spain be evenly matched and fight each other to death. And he also understands what Marin means, that is, to unite the forces of Britain and the French army left behind in the mainland to fight a decisive battle on the Great Plains in northern France and eliminate the living forces of France. As long as the more than 10,000 French knights left in Paris can be eliminated, then France will inevitably be seriously injured. It is said that this is good for Austria, but the emperor is worried about the failure of the decisive battle on the plain. Because the plains are very conducive to the performance of French heavy cavalry. Also, if France is really crippled, no one will stop Spain's expansion. Well, these are actually excuses. As for why His Majesty the Emperor made such a choice. Because he learned from his daughter Queen Margaret that the volcanic ash of the Kingdom of Naples can increase agricultural production. After hearing this secret, Maximilian I was jealous to death. He also wanted to obtain the Kingdom of Naples, but the Habsburg family was not strong enough to intervene in the hegemony of Naples. As a result, His Majesty the Emperor became jealous. Originally, he should have joined forces with England to severely punish France and let France suffer a big loss. However, because of his strong jealousy of Spain, His Majesty the Emperor chose a more short-sighted option: concentrate on taking down Switzerland first. As for the Franco-Spanish hegemony, he just watched the excitement. Unless France has the upper hand, he will help Spain. As complicated as Marin was, he didn't expect that His Majesty the Emperor would choose not to help his in-law ally Spain because of jealousy. He just wondered why His Majesty the Emperor suddenly became so short-sighted and felt very annoyed. Chapter 1720 Uncle Ma is very angry, the consequences are serious. As the only emperor in Europe, Maximilian I was very eager for the Habsburg family to become strong and actually unify Germany. Even, unify Western Europe and establish a powerful empire like the Charlemagne Empire. Therefore, the competition between France and Spain, whether France overwhelms Spain or Spain overwhelms France, is not what Maximilian I wants to see. In his opinion, it is best for both countries to lose, and then let Austria take action to clean up France and suppress Spain. Of course, from a purely politician's point of view, the emperor's choice is no problem. This is the choice that a seasoned politician should have. After all, although Spain is a relative ally of the Habsburg family, it is two families. Originally in history, the reason why Spain and Austria were able to beat France was because the monarchs of the two countries were both Charles V. Since they are one family, they naturally cooperate closely and work together to beat France. But because of Marin's intervention, Juan III did not die and gave birth to a son. Then, the two families could not merge into one. In this way, it is not surprising that each has his own thoughts. In fact, in the current competition for supremacy in Europe, the Habsburg family has fallen behind. Because the Habsburg family is too poor. Hegemony also requires capital. Apart from anything else, the money and food for the army to go to war is a huge pit. France is naturally not afraid, because it is the largest agricultural country in Europe and has a strong foundation. Therefore, Maximilian I has always suffered losses when facing France. If the French had not faced Spain at the same time, God knows whether the Habsburg family could keep the Netherlands and Franche-Comté. And Spain, an ally of the Habsburg family, was not much better than Austria. But because of the great voyages, especially under the influence of Marin, after obtaining huge profits from the Indian spice trade, the national strength rose and Austria was left behind all of a sudden, reaching the level of being able to fight France alone. In other words, the original competition for supremacy among the three European powers has now become a fight between the West and France. And Austria has become a spectator and can only be busy cleaning up the Swiss resistance. How can the arrogant Maximilian I bear this? Therefore, even though Maximilian I knew that attacking Paris together with England was the best way to hit France, he still chose to reject Marin's suggestion and instead devoted himself to the seemingly short-sighted plan of cleaning up the Swiss. Without the assistance of Austria, England alone would not be able to attack Paris. At most, it could only harass the coastal areas in northern and western France, like Japanese pirates, causing little damage to France. At least, it would not hurt the French. Therefore, the emperor's short-sighted behavior made Marin very angry. Uncle Ma was very angry, and the consequences were serious. Seeing that His Majesty the Emperor was so ignorant of his kindness, Marin had evil thoughts in his heart. Humph, you want to annex Switzerland, right? I won't let you do as you wish. Angry Marin decided to mess with His Majesty the Emperor. How to mess with him? It's very simple, just secretly notify Sieg and tell him the secret news that Ludendorff joined the Emperor's side. At the same time, support Sieg with a batch of matchlock guns. Obviously, with the addition of 16,000 new troops, the strength comparison on the Swiss battlefield has changed dramatically. If it's just a head-on fight, the Swiss will lose. But what if they don't fight head-on? Marin's plan to disrupt the situation is very simple. If they fight head-on, the Swiss are definitely not the opponents of the Habsburg army. However, if they retreat and defend, it's still possible. But if they defend the city, the Swiss spearmen alone can hardly resist the Habsburgs' military advantage. In this way, the importance of the matchlock gun comes out. The Habsburgs don't have heavy artillery to blast open the city walls, and such heavy artillery is difficult to transport on the Swiss plateau. And small-caliber infantry guns can hardly blast open the city walls, or even the city gates. As long as the Swiss retreat to the fortified city and cover the city gates with iron sheets. Then, prepare a batch of matchlock guns on the city wall, then it will be extremely difficult for the Habsburgs to conquer the city. In addition to defending the fortified city and fighting against the Habsburg superior forces, the Swiss resistance can actually divide some troops and horses, and use the advantage of familiar terrain in the Swiss mountains to fight guerrilla warfare with the Habsburgs. The Swiss resistance army is composed of local mountain people, who are most familiar with the local terrain. Moreover, the individual combat effectiveness of Swiss mercenaries is strong. If we use the complex local mountainous terrain to fight guerrilla warfare with the Habsburg army, it will be really difficult to deal with. There are matchlock guns on the top of the city for defense, and there are also Swiss mountain resistance forces in the wild who occasionally take small paths to attack. Even if the Habsburg army has an advantage in strength, it will be a headache. If it is replaced by a plain area like the Netherlands, with a large army, it will naturally have an advantage. But Switzerland is different. Switzerland only has some plains in the north, while the western region is mainly mountainous, which is very suitable for guerrilla warfare. If a small group of elite troops can be arranged in front, go around the Habsburg army from a small path, and attack those food and grass supplies, it will be difficult for the Habsburg family to bear it a few more times. After the plan was made, Marin asked Kohler to find an absolutely trustworthy spy, and go to Switzerland to inform Sieg in the name of French spy. This is not a joke. If the news of informing the Swiss is leaked, Marin will be a man inside and outside. After all, betraying allies is a taboo. Therefore, Marin asked for an absolutely reliable spy who could speak French. A few days later, the spy of the North Sea Kingdom, who went by the alias Giroux, changed horses along the way and finally arrived in Bern, and delivered the intelligence to Sieg, who was planning an attack. Sieg was shocked when he received the secret. He did not expect that Ludendorff's army, which had said that it would return to its hometown in Germany, would all turn to the emperor. After all, with the financial resources of the Habsburg family, they should not be able to hire them. This matter should be blamed on Marin. Before, in order to instigate the emperor to send these people to the Netherlands to participate in the attack on Paris, he provided the emperor with a loan in advance. Unexpectedly, after the emperor got the loan, he turned around and said that he would take over western Switzerland first. Giving money but not doing things is what angered Marin. In short, Uncle Ma was very angry, and the consequences were really serious. Sieg, who received the secret report, was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. Because of the lack of intelligence sources, the Swiss resistance army used to rely mainly on the French for intelligence sharing, but the French sent intelligence personnel to Italy, and Sieg and his men lacked intelligence sources. The Swiss resistance army did not know that Ludendorff's entire army had surrendered to His Majesty the Emperor. According to their usual speculation, they believed that the Habsburg family had no money to hire this army, so they did not pay much attention to it. If they rashly attacked Frundsberg's army without preparation, the opponent's sudden 50,000 troops would definitely catch the Swiss resistance army off guard. It can be said that the intelligence that Marin provided to him in anger this time saved the Swiss resistance army. At the same time, it also pitted the emperor. Humph, who told His Majesty the Emperor not to listen to Uncle Ma's advice and even fooled away alone. Uncle Ma gets angry, and the consequences are very serious. Chapter 1721 Claiming Ownership. After Sieg got accurate intelligence, he ordered people to reinforce the city walls and look for iron sheets to cover the city gates. In addition, he sent people to sneak into the eastern region through mountain roads to inquire about the news in order to confirm the authenticity of the intelligence. Most importantly, Sieg withdrew all the military camps originally deployed in the wild. These military camps were originally deployed to launch offensive troops. Now, they are still in the wild, waiting to be destroyed by the enemy's superior forces. Only by withdrawing to the fortified city can safety be guaranteed. Then, Sieg selected a group of mountain people who were very familiar with the local terrain, formed a guerrilla team, and equipped them with a lot of crossbows to raid the enemy's supply lines. These crossbows can launch rockets, mainly used to burn the enemy's food and grass, especially the fodder for war horses. However, guarding the fortified city requires a lot of food, and the Swiss do not have much food, so they can only ask France for help. The carrier pigeon flew to Paris, and François I thought about it and agreed to provide food and grass support to the Swiss. However, it takes time. So, under the advice of French officials, Sieg deliberately sent people to the emperor's palace in Innsbruck, the capital of Tyrol, to delay time, pretending to negotiate recruitment. Sieg's envoy pretended to agree to surrender to the Habsburg family, but demanded certain autonomy rights. At the same time, he asked for baron titles and territories for a group of generals of the resistance army. In fact, Sieg and a group of Swiss resistance generals never thought of surrendering to the Habsburg family. They just had to delay time because the food support from France had not yet arrived. The emperor had doubts about Sieg's envoy, but the envoy sent by Sieg was very smart. At the beginning, he asked for a sky-high price and insisted on guaranteeing the autonomy of Western Switzerland, which made the emperor believe it a little. If the envoy said that he wanted to surrender unconditionally, the emperor would definitely not believe it. Because there is no such thing as a free lunch. But the resistance army made such a rude, which was considered rude in the eyes of the Habsburg family, request, which seemed a bit true. Of course, the emperor was unwilling to allow Western Switzerland to be autonomous. In addition, he also wanted to paralyze the Swiss resistance army through negotiations. So, pretend to consider it. But secretly, they began to arrange for Gudendorf's army to be transferred to the front line. But Gudendorf's soldiers said that they had to settle their families before the attack. So, for a while, Gudendorf's army could not be put into the battlefield. So, whether it was Sieg's resistance army or Maximilian I, they were willing to pretend to negotiate to delay time. In fact, both sides had no sincerity. Sieg wanted to delay time until the food was shipped from France. And Maximilian I had to wait for Gudendorf's people to settle down and rush to the front line. In addition, he also wanted to catch the Swiss resistance army off guard. So, both sides pretended to negotiate, deliberately arguing for small conditions and wasting time. But both sides didn't know that neither side was actually ready. So, they were negotiating and acting there, which was actually a waste of time. Not only did Sieg's Swiss resistance army's food and grass not arrive, but Gudendorf's 16,000 army's food and grass were actually not in place. It is true that Maximilian I got the loan from Marin, but it is useless to have money alone, and he had to purchase food. This takes time, so Maximilian I allowed Gudendorf and his men to settle their families first. Because it takes time for Maximilian I's men to purchase and transport food with money. In particular, Maximilian I originally wanted to buy military rations from Marin, who had sufficient food. But because Maximilian I did not agree to besiege France together, Marin was reluctant to sell food to the emperor and found a lot of excuses, saying that the stored food was not enough. The emperor had no choice but to purchase food from elsewhere. For cost considerations, the emperor ordered people to buy food in the Lviv area of Poland, where the food price in Europe was the lowest at that time. At this time, Lviv, although located in the black soil belt of Ukraine, belongs to Poland and is the most important grain-producing area in Poland. In history, Lviv later belonged to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and later when Poland was divided, it was divided to Austria. After World War II, the Soviet Union, as a victorious country, rudely took away the fertile region of Lviv. As compensation, the Soviet Union assigned most of the Silesia region that originally belonged to East Germany to Poland. Of course, this was the Soviet Union's generosity to others, and it was actually Germany that was unlucky. In this era, the Lviv region had a high grain yield due to the fertile black soil. The local area was vast and sparsely populated, and the land was fertile. Therefore, the price of grain was very cheap, only 0.5 to 0.6 pfennigs per pound of rye, which was only half the price in the German region. However, it was very difficult to transport grain from southern Poland to Switzerland. Fortunately, the emperor found a powerful Moldavia, later Moldova, businessman who could transport grain to the main channel of the Danube River, the Siret River, which originated in the lower reaches of the Danube near Lviv. Then, go up the river and arrive in Bavaria. Bavaria is very close to Switzerland, so it is more convenient to transport grain. All in all, it is a little cheaper than purchasing grain from the North Sea Kingdom. The main reason is that there are too many mountain roads on the road from Bavaria to Switzerland, and the cost of land transportation is very high. Otherwise, the transportation cost would be cheaper. However, transporting from Lviv, taking the Siret River, then entering the Danube, and then going up to Bavaria and then taking the mountain road. The cost is certainly lower, but it takes a long time. And this is also the biggest reason why Maximilian I needs to delay the attack. Sieg didn't know, and stupidly sent people to negotiate with the emperor to delay time. Little did he know that he didn't have to do this, and His Majesty the Emperor would not be able to launch an attack in a short time. For this pair of fools who thought they had a plan, Marin laughed happily after learning the truth from the spy report stationed in Switzerland. Of course, he didn't say it, just waiting for the day when both sides were secretly proud and finally found that they had worked in vain. Of course, Marin has more important things to do. He wants to take his son to London to get engaged. Although many people are now waiting to see whether Queen Anne of France can get pregnant and give birth to a posthumous child, Marin knows that it is impossible. Because Queen Anne had lost her fertility long ago, and it was he who ordered the medicine personally. So, while others were waiting, he had already made up his mind. While others were waiting, Marin and Caesar had already prepared to go to London. In fact, there is no custom of baby marriage in Europe. Marin brought Caesar with him on this trip, and he would not really make an engagement with Edward. The reason for this is mainly because the mortality rate of children in Europe is extremely high. For example, Queen Anne of later generations gave birth to 17 children, but none of them lived to adulthood. Therefore, Europeans generally do not make baby marriages. Because even the king dare not guarantee that his children can live to adulthood. It is a waste of effort to make baby marriages. It is better to wait until both parties live to the corresponding age before discussing the marriage. But Marin's trip was not to confirm the marriage in writing, but to take his son to declare the ownership of Princess Margaret. As the only daughter of the King of England, marrying Princess Margaret means that there is a great possibility of inheriting the entire Kingdom of England, including Scotland and Ireland conquered by Edward. Therefore, there were quite a lot of people who coveted Princess Margaret. Everyone wanted their son to marry Princess Margaret and then become the ruler of England. Originally, because of Louis XII, most people didn't dare to jump out to fight. But now that Louis XII is dead, many people are ready to make a move. What? You said that according to the Treaty of Nantes, Marin's son Caesar is the second person in line to marry Princess Margaret? Having said that, some short-sighted nobles in England do not think so. Just like the French did not accept the King of England becoming the King of France 100 years ago, there are also many nobles in England who do not agree with Caesar marrying Princess Margaret and becoming the King of England. Inspired by the French practice, some nobles in England believe that they can choose a noble son of noble blood from England to marry Princess Margaret. In this way, it can be regarded as keeping the wealth within the family. This angered Marin, so this time Marin not only planned to take Caesar to London, but also took an army with him. The purpose is to show off military power. At the same time, declare the ownership of Princess Margaret. Chapter 1722 London Demonstration. The reason why Marin was so anxious was because the North Sea Kingdom spies in London reported that not only some nobles in England had such an idea, but even Edward himself had this convenient idea. Edward had discussed with Queen Anna in private and considered marrying Princess Margaret to the son of Edward's deceased sister, Princess Margaret, that is, Henry Pole, the eldest son of Princess Margaret and Richard Pole, Edward's nephew. Although he resented his brother-in-law Richard Pole for killing his sister, Edward was good to the children left by his sister Princess Margaret. Marrying his daughter Margaret to his nephew Henry Pole was also a close relationship. The only thing Edward was concerned about was probably the Treaty of Nantes that was signed at the time. Although Louis XII was dead, Queen Mother Anne had the possibility of giving birth to a posthumous child. Moreover, Marin was also eyeing him covetously. If Marin was an ordinary foreign prince, Edward would probably regret it. But the problem is that Marin has 2 legions of 10,000 people in England, and his strength is very strong. If he regretted it, it would probably force Marin to rebel. You know, there are only 40,000 regular army troops in England now, but 20,000 of them are Marin's men. Those English nobles may not know, thinking that the 2 legions were conquered by themselves. But in fact, Edward knew very well that the 2 legions were still Marin's legions. As long as Marin is willing, the 2 legions dare to turn against each other. And the 2 legions directly under Edward are not as powerful as Marin's 2 legions. Therefore, Edward obviously wanted to marry his daughter to his nephew, but he did not dare to propose it in public, fearing that the 2 legions would rebel. In order to show off his military power, Marin rebelled against London this time, dispatched 2,500-ton warships and brought 3,000 extremely elite infantry. The clothes worn by these elite infantrymen are very interesting, just like the ones worn when sending his sister Anne to marry. Most of them are bright ceremonial armor made of tinplate. However, it is very useful for pretending. This kind of tinplate cut-out price looks very much like plate armor. It's just that the thickness is different. But others only look at the appearance, and can't come up to touch the thickness, so naturally they don't know that this is a fake. Therefore, the 3,000 elite soldiers put on the plate armor, cut from tinplate, marching in neat steps, which looks very bluffing. Moreover, the tinplate has a strong reflective ability, making the armor look very bright. Marin took Angela and Caesar, and the family of three boarded the battleship and began their second visit to London, leaving only the second son William, who was accompanied by the old Hoffman couple, to sit in the palace. The North Sea Kingdom now has 3,500-ton battleships, which can be said to be a very powerful fleet in Western Europe. The most important thing is that this fleet mainly uses artillery for combat, and its tactical thinking is advanced. Moreover, the hull is much thicker than the popular carracks and caravels in Europe. However, 10 500-ton battleships were escorted by Marin to Japan, and there are currently only 20 battleships at home. In order to show off his military power this time, Marin also gathered all the warships. Armed merchant ships are not counted as warships, and took them to London to show off. When the huge fleet sailed into the estuary of the Thames, the sails covered the sky, and the black muzzles of the ships were also shocking. Of course, most of the warships just blocked the estuary of the Thames and did not dock at the London docks. Only Marin's flagship and several warships carrying 3,000 guards docked at the London docks. This time Marin came to show off his military power, so he was naturally not as friendly as last time. Therefore, the dock where Marin's ship docked was not the royal dock next to the Tower of London, but the largest civilian dock in the city of London. The civilian dock is wide enough to dock several warships. And the row of long bridged docks also facilitated the landing of Marin's 3,000 guards. In order to show enough pomp, Marin and his family of three did not disembark first, but let 3,000 guards wearing ceremonial armor, tinplate armor, land first and formed a neat formation on the dock. Then, Marin took Angela and Caesar and slowly disembarked amid the uniform cheers of the guards. Howard, the foreign minister under Edward, had a bitter face. He didn't know why Marin, who was friendly and approachable last time, suddenly became so particular about pomp this time. How could he know that Marin came here to demonstrate deliberately this time, so he naturally paid attention to these things. So, after Marin got off the boat, he just nodded to Howard, and then boarded the golden four-wheeled carriage prepared by Edward for Marin. After Marin got on the carriage, 3,000 North Sea guards surrounded the golden carriage at a very fast speed, squeezed away the coachmen sent by the English, and took over the control of the carriage. Then, 3,000 guards, holding shining swords and guns, lined up in an extremely neat team, surrounded the golden carriage of Marin's family of three, and slowly moved towards the Tower of London. Edward's foreign minister Howard was depressed and squeezed outside. That's not all. When they arrived in front of the Tower of London, suddenly Sakara, the commander of the 4th Legion, who was supposed to be stationed in Newcastle, came with a team of officers of the 4th Legion on horseback to join Marin's team. Obviously, Sakara was also here to boost Marin's momentum. Since it was a demonstration, Marin didn't mind telling the government and the public of England a fact: the 4th Legion was on our side. If anyone has other ideas, think about it first. Only the 5th Legion was stationed in Edinburgh, Scotland, far away, so Sivag didn't come to join in the fun. Then, Edward stood on the top floor of the palace with a black line on his head, watching Sakara lead a group of officers of the 4th Legion, surrounded Marin's golden carriage, and entered the Tower of London. And beside Edward, a group of ministers also looked very unnatural. Because they realized that Sakara was still Sakara, and was not won over by His Majesty Edward, but was still loyal to Marin. For those ministers who were not happy that foreign monarchs married Princess Margaret, this was definitely very bad news. Of course, Marin still saved face for Edward. In front of the gate of the Tower of London, 3,000 North Sea guards stopped and did not follow into the palace. After all, they were guest soldiers, and it was good enough to enter London. If they entered the palace again, it would be a slap in Edward's face. If it were in the East, this would be considered a rebellion. You know, in the Ming dynasty, guest soldiers were not allowed to enter the city. Marin's 3,000 troops actually entered the city of London without Edward's approval. Foreign Secretary Howard wanted to stop it, and only let hundreds of people escort Marin into the city. Unfortunately, Howard was excluded from the crowd by Marin's guards and couldn't talk to Marin. The English soldiers guarding the city gate were frightened by the momentum of Marin's 3,000 guards and even forgot to stop them from entering the city. When Marin arrived at the Tower of London with 3,000 people, Edward was even afraid that Marin would lead his men to attack the palace directly. Fortunately, Edward knew that Marin was a more disciplined person, so he did not order an attack on Marin's guards. Otherwise, the matter would have become a big deal. But at this moment, the matter has actually become a big deal. Because Marin's 3,000 guards in shiny ceremonial armor all stood in the square in front of the gate of the Tower of London. That posture, as if the North Sea Army surrounded the Tower of London, brought tremendous psychological pressure to the English monarch and ministers in the palace. Chapter 1723, Bluff. Edward was very annoyed when he saw Marin leading a large army into London and standing in the square in front of the palace. Because the meaning of this demonstration was too obvious. However, he did not dare to turn his face directly, so he had to endure his dissatisfaction and pretended to be friendly and asked, "Marin, why did you bring so many guards to London this time?" "I was scared." Marin stood up and said with face, "Your Majesty, please forgive me. I have fought countless battles in the past 20 years, defeated too many enemies, and killed many mortal enemies. When it comes to fighting, I am really not afraid of anyone. But, someone took the opportunity to assassinate me on the way. Moreover, the North Sea Kingdom lacks everything, but it does not lack invincible elite soldiers. These guys have nothing to do and are bored at home, so I just brought them to protect me. With 3,000 guards protecting me closely, I don't believe anyone can assassinate me." Marin's words are profound. On the surface, he is self-deprecating for being timid and afraid of assassination. In fact, he is showing off his military power. For example, he said, "When it comes to fighting, I've never been afraid of anyone, and the North Sea Kingdom lacks everything, but it doesn't lack invincible elite soldiers." It's clear that he is telling all the English monarchs and ministers present I am invincible in a head-on battle. This sounds very domineering, but the English monarchs and ministers present can't refute it. Because Marin has never lost a battle, so he has the qualifications to brag. In fact, it's not that Marin is really a god of war, but that Marin can hide. When encountering a battle that he is not sure of, this guy doesn't fight at all. When he should be cowardly, he doesn't want to lose face at all. So, it seems that he is invincible. Of course, there are also benefits to being shameless. If you are not dragged down by your reputation, you won't do things that you are not sure of. For example, Napoleon, such a real god of war, was really going to conquer all of Europe because of his reputation. In the end, he failed in Russia, and then the overall situation collapsed. The actual situation is that in the later period, the entire French Empire was somewhat superstitious about Napoleon's war ability and felt that the empire could be invincible. Then, the whole country expected France to push the whole of Europe. At that time, even Napoleon was a little bit stuck. Because the whole French Empire expected their emperor to lead them to conquer all of Europe. To use a comment from later generations, the emperor was kidnapped by the public opinion of the French people. Marin was unwilling to be the fool kidnapped by public opinion. Without full confidence, he would rather be a coward than take risks. Because he knew that this was not a game and could not be repeated. Once he failed, he would die. Therefore, when facing the German Prince's alliance and the Kingdom of France, he showed his invincible side on the one hand, implying that he was not easy to provoke. On the other hand, he was humble and did not provoke or stimulate the German Prince's alliance and the Kingdom of France. Because he was not sure that he could face the joint attack of France and the German princes at the same time. But if one of France or the German princes was weakened or dragged down, Marin would be more confident. So Marin desperately instigated France to compete with Spain for the Kingdom of Naples to consume France's strength. But France has a strong foundation. As the largest land and population country in Western Europe, France has a greater war potential than Spain. Therefore, Marin judged that if France was willing to overdraw its national strength, they could even fight two wars at the same time. Yes, France is poor. Compared with Spain, which has the spice trade, France's financial situation is not good. However, the problem of poverty is not unsolvable. For example, borrowing. As long as France is willing to pay a high price, Venice will lend money to the French. Because, France lacks nothing except money. Therefore, Marin specially invited the emperor to send troops to unite with England to plunder Paris and the Paris basin where Paris is located. There is no need to conquer Paris, just destroy the crops near Paris, and the French will be seriously injured. Why do you say that? Because the volcanic ash that France got from the Kingdom of Naples, which can fertilize tens of thousands of acres of land, was transported back to Paris by the French and fertilized in the royal estates near Paris. In other words, because of these volcanic ash fertilizers, by the autumn, the royal estates near Paris can bring tens of millions of pounds of grain to the French royal family. Tens of millions of pounds of food are definitely enough for the French to form a large army and launch a large-scale war. You know, each warhorse only needs 4.8 kilograms, more than 10 pounds, of feed per day. 100,000 warhorses consume only 1 million pounds of food every day. What Marin wanted to do most was to let tens of thousands of British and Austrian soldiers trample all the grain fields in the Paris basin, so that the French would not only not increase their grain harvest, but also be short of food. But His Majesty the Emperor had his own little thoughts and refused to send troops. So, Marin had to come to Britain to think of a solution. Demonstrations are just a byproduct. Marin is not a second generation with a bad temper. How could he make this trip specifically for demonstrations? He came here this time to persuade Edward to attack France. Of course, because of the presence of ministers, Marin was not easy to say directly. Some things are better discussed with Edward in private. Because Marin suspected that there were French spies in Edward's court. Marin's suspicion is very normal. In this era, most traditional European nobles are two-faced. It was normal for someone in England to have secret dealings with France. Therefore, he could not discuss this issue with Edward in public, and could only discuss it in private. At the public welcome banquet, Marin was domineering and showed an attitude of, "I am invincible." He did not take the English nobles present seriously at all, which made many of the English nobles present want to duel with Marin. Only when talking to Edward did Marin show enough respect. After all, Edward was above him in status and was even his nominal monarch. After all, Marin was still the Earl of England. After the banquet, when Edward entertained Marin's family of 3 in private, Marin immediately bowed to Edward and apologized, "Your Majesty, I'm sorry for my previous rudeness. I did that for a reason." "Have a reason?" "What reason?" Edward was a little curious. After Marin signaled Edward to dismiss everyone around him, the two came to the study, and Marin whispered, "Your Majesty, I suspect there are French spies in the English court." "What? French spies? It's unlikely. I have cleaned up the court several times." Edward didn't quite believe it. Marin said with certainty, "There must be French spies, because my people in Paris can find out the news in your Majesty's palace." In fact, this was Marin fooling Edward. Even if the French planted spies in London, the news they got would not be leaked casually in Paris. Edward didn't believe it either, but Marin's words made him speechless. "Your Majesty, some time ago, did you discuss with the Queen privately about marrying Princess Margaret to Henry Pole?" Edward was shocked. This was something he and Queen Anna discussed privately. How did Marin know? Marin smiled in his heart. In fact, this was the news sent back by the spy he planted in the London palace. However, what he said was, "My spies got the news in Paris. Obviously, there are French spies in your Majesty's palace." After saying this, Marin looked around meaningfully, as if there were French spies eavesdropping around. Chapter 1724, The Dangers of Close Marriage and Confidentiality. After Edward was extremely shocked, he realized a problem. No wonder Marin was furious when he came, because according to the Treaty of Nantes, if Louis XII had no children, Margaret should marry Caesar. At this moment, Edward was no longer angry, but a little embarrassed. After all, he wanted to break his promise, but was discovered. But then, Edward was a little confused. "This is what Queen Anna and I talked about casually when we were resting in the bedroom at night. How could it be spread to the French?" When Edward expressed his doubts, he also pushed the idea of changing his son-in-law. Marin sneered in his heart, but did not express it on his face. Instead, he said, "This is not easy to say. You know, Queen Anna is French. In order to take care of Queen Anna, there are French cooks and French maids in the palace." After a pause, Marin said meaningfully, "Moreover, Queen Anna's father is a diehard fan of Louis XII. Marin's words actually implied that Queen Anna was also suspected. Edward's face changed, and he said, "No way. Although there are some French people under Anna's command, there are no longer the people arranged by Count Det. There shouldn't be any French spies. I personally accompanied the Queen to select these people. They are all French people with clean backgrounds." Marin shook his head and pretended to be puzzled. "I don't know, but how did Paris know about the private conversations between your Majesty and the Queen?" Edward suddenly didn't know what to say, because there was really no way to explain this matter. Then, just as Marin thought, Edward also planted the seeds of doubt in his heart about Queen Anna. Why did Marin want to alienate the relationship between Edward and Queen Anna? Because if Edward died, Queen Anna would definitely be regent. Therefore, it would be best for Edward to alienate Queen Anna before he died. If Anna's position as queen could be deposed, it would be even better. By then, even if Princess Margaret ascended the throne, Queen Anna would not have to control the government. If Queen Anna controls the government, Marin is 70% sure that Anna will make friends with France. After all, Queen Anna is an authentic French. With Queen Anna, Marin cannot get the regency of the Kingdom of England. Therefore, in Marin's eyes, Queen Anna is a stumbling block that needs to be removed in advance. Although it is not impossible to murder Queen Anna in the future, if Edward and Queen Anna both die, any normal person will see that something is wrong. Therefore, it is best to let Edward personally remove the stumbling block of Anna before he dies. In this way, no one will doubt Marin's decision to let Caesar marry Margaret and let himself get the regency of England. Of course, this matter must be done step by step. At the moment, Marin can only arouse Edward's suspicion first. Then, using the spies of the North Sea Kingdom in the English government and the opposition, he quietly influenced Edward and eventually turned against Edward and Queen Anna. After a moment of silence, Marin pretended to think it over and said, "Your Majesty, I want to tell you something very important. I hope to draw your attention to it." "What is it?" Edward asked. Marriage between close relatives is prone to extinction. What? Edward stood up in shock. You know, he did plan to marry his daughter to his own nephew. If it is really as Marin said, if he made such an arrangement, wouldn't he be actively making his daughter extinct? After calming himself down, Edward stared at Marin and said, "Are you serious?" In fact, Edward suspected that Marin said this on purpose. The purpose is that he does not want his daughter to marry Henry, but to marry Caesar. Marin is full of confidence. After all, this has been scientifically proven. Of course it is true. I heard from the court doctor of the Eastern Ming Empire that, the imperial doctor of the Ming dynasty said, we don't know either, that if a man and a woman within 3 generations of blood relatives marry, it is easy to cause difficulties in having children. Even if a child is born, it is easy to be weak and sick, and it is difficult to live to adulthood. In severe cases, it may even give birth to a mentally retarded child. This is not Marin's trick, but it is indeed the case. Although not every child of a close relative marriage has problems, the probability of problems is indeed higher than that of a normal family. For example, Lu Yu, although he and his cousin Tang Wan were in love after marriage, they failed to leave offspring. But this is actually not so absolute. For example, Chang Sun Chong married his cousin Princess Changoli Lizzie and gave birth to his legitimate son Chang Sun Yen. It is even rumored that the parents of the little mustache are close relatives, but the little mustache is so powerful. And the opposite representative in this regard is the unlucky Habsburg family. Historically, the Spanish Habsburg family, Charles V's lineage, intermarried with Charles V's brother Ferdinand I's lineage, which led to the death of Philip IV's first few sons. The only surviving son, Carlos II, was still a fool. This fool didn't know how to sleep with his queen, so he died without leaving any offspring, and then, it led to the Spanish War of the Throne. However, it is true that the probability of problems with inbreeding is greater. Moreover, in order for his son to marry Margaret more safely, Marin would only talk about it in a terrible direction. Is it that terrible? Edward was also a little scared by Marin's words. Of course, he still maintained a skeptical attitude. Marin pondered for a while, and finally said, "Your Majesty, I am not talking nonsense. You can go and find out about those great nobles who have no descendants. Many of them married their cousins or even cousins. If your Majesty doesn't believe it, you can send someone to investigate." Marin was full of confidence, and he didn't need to talk about this kind of thing. As long as Edward was willing to send someone to investigate, he would know that what he said was true. But in fact, many nobles died out because of the low level of medical care in Europe. Some nobles who married close relatives actually had no problems with their children, but because of backward medical care, the children did not live to adulthood, not because of the close relatives. Marin put all the blame on the close relatives to scare Edward. Seeing Marin's confidence and asking him to send someone to investigate, Edward also believed it a little. After all, lies cannot withstand investigation. Just when Edward was thinking about how to send someone to investigate this issue, Marin suddenly said, "Your Majesty, please keep this secret and don't spread it everywhere." Edward was stunned and asked in confusion, "Why? Wouldn't it be possible to avoid more tragedies if everyone knew the disadvantages of close-kin marriage?" Marin explained, "It's like this, if you publicize it, will your mortal enemy also know about it? And if it is kept secret, your mortal enemy may continue this kind of marriage, and then, there will be no heirs." After a pause, Marin lowered his voice and said, "Also, if the great lords under you also continue this kind of marriage, wouldn't it be easy for them to become extinct? Then, the land can be taken back by the royal family." Edward felt a chill in his chest when he heard this. However, thinking carefully, it was true. If the dukes and earls under him had many children, then there would be more and more nobles in the country, and there would not be enough land to distribute. Although Marin's statement was sinister, it was indeed in line with the interests of the royal family. After nodding solemnly, Edward said, "I understand, I will quietly send reliable people to investigate this matter." Chapter 1725, Encouraging England to Seize Calais. Edward was both excited and depressed at this time. He was excited because he finally understood why many nobles who married close relatives were prone to extinction. The depressed part was even simpler, he was not married to a close relative, so why couldn't he have a son? Of course, he didn't know that he had been violently neutered by the wicked Louis XII with a master of kicking balls. If he knew this secret, Marin was sure that Edward would attack France madly. Although Marin also hoped that Edward would attack France madly, the timing was not right. Otherwise, Marin would have told Edward the truth long ago. The reason why the timing was wrong was that Marin was not ready to take over England. Once he took over England, Marin would not only face the resistance of the opposition forces in England, but also the blow from France. Because France also wanted to annex England. If the French saw Marin jumping out to pick peaches, they would definitely be jealous and crazy. At that time, the North Sea Kingdom would become the target of France's crazy revenge. Because France is really capable of fighting 2 wars at the same time. Therefore, before annexing England, Marin hopes to weaken France. At least, France must lose the ability to fight two wars at the same time. At the same time, Marin also hopes that the legions hidden in America can be trained. By then, the troops will be sufficient, and France will be weakened, and the hope of successfully taking over England will increase greatly. Therefore, at this moment, Marin's goal is to instigate Edward to attack France. Even attacking the northern and western coasts of France is a kind of weakening of France. After discussing the harm of close relatives' marriage, Marin led the topic to the current political instability in France. Speaking of it, Marin suddenly instigated, "Your Majesty, while the little king of France has not yet taken control of the overall situation, let's send troops to take back Calais." Take back Calais? Edward was startled, and then he showed a serious desire. The loss of the Calais fortress was a major setback for Edward after he ascended the throne. You know, throughout the ages, the Calais fortress has been England's only foothold on the European continent. After losing the Calais fortress, England's influence on the European continent has been greatly reduced. Even the English wool export port was forced to move to Antwerp, which made Prince Philip of the Habsburg family earn a lot of tax revenue. Therefore, Edward was indeed eager to recapture the Calais fortress. But the problem is that Edward has no confidence. England has never been a land power, and has no confidence in facing the French army. You know, after the French captured the Calais fortress, they stationed 5,000 troops in the city of Calais, which was very strong. The combat effectiveness of the French infantry is superior to that of the British, and the walls of the Calais fortress are tall and strong. Even if England dispatches 20,000 troops, it may not be able to capture the Calais fortress. Besides, the French are not dead. During the siege, Paris will definitely send a large army to rescue. Unless England can capture the Calais fortress in a very short time. Otherwise, once the Paris reinforcements arrive, the English will fail. By the way, Your Majesty, when England ruled the Calais fortress before, didn't it have any secret passages in and out of the city? If there were such secret passages, we could send a team of elite soldiers to sneak into the city, open the city gates, and then cooperate with the inside and outside. Marin suggested. But Edward shook his head and said, there is no secret passage leading to the city in Calais. When England controlled the Calais fortress before, the English warships were confident that they could control the docks and the north gate next to the dock. Therefore, we don't need secret passages to completely control the Calais fortress. Marin was speechless, but he also knew that the English were indeed confident. Because the English navy can easily deal with the French navy, if it can be considered a navy. However, the English never thought that Calais would be conquered one day. Under normal circumstances, the English army would indeed not be able to conquer the Calais fortress. If that were the case, Marin would not have come to find Edward. Marin just smiled and said, Your Majesty, under normal circumstances, the Calais fortress is indeed difficult to conquer. But what if I can send people to open the iron gates of the sewers in the city and let a group of elite English soldiers into the city? Edward fell into deep thought. The iron gates of the sewers in Calais are in the northwest corner of Calais, some distance away from the north gate and the west gate. Even if a group of elite English soldiers got in, they would probably be quickly surrounded by French soldiers. So, Edward shook his head and said, not appropriate. I have studied the map of Calais city. The sewer gate is in the northwest corner of the city, far away from the north gate and the west gate. Moreover, there is a small French military camp near the gate. If the French are alarmed, it will be useless even if a group of people go in. You want to pry open the sewer gate in the middle of the night. The gate is less than 50 yards away from a small French barracks. It is said that in the middle of the night, the French will send people holding torches on the wall of the barracks to monitor the situation at the sewer gate. Once there is any movement, the French will definitely check. If they give the alarm, all the French troops in the city will come. Marin smiled and said, under normal circumstances, of course, this is the case. However, my people have been lurking in Calais for a long time and have discovered a situation, that is, on rainy nights, the French do not leave anyone on the wall to monitor the military camp responsible for guarding the sewer gate. Because torches are easily extinguished by rain on rainy days. Moreover, the sound of rain on rainy days can just cover up the sound of opening the gate. How do you open it? Pick the lock. Violent destruction. Such a sound should alarm the people in the military camp, right? Even the sound of rain is difficult to cover up. Edward questioned. In fact, this is also one of the reasons why the French do not send people to guard the night on rainy days. Because the iron gate of the sewer is very thick, if it is violently destroyed, it is easy for the French in the military camp to hear it. And picking the lock. There are 5 iron locks on the iron gate, all of which are very complicated locks. Don't worry, Your Majesty, my people will never make too much noise when destroying the iron locks. At that time, your people just need to drill in. Marin said very confidently. His confidence came from the legendary Aqua Regia. Even if there were 5 large iron locks, he had the confidence to corrode them within an hour. Previously, the iron gate of the sewer in Paris was removed in this way, and the French still didn't understand how the iron gate was opened. Fortunately, Marin's men took away the iron lock of the Paris sewer iron gate that was corroded by aqua regia, so that the French could not see the picture of the iron lock being corroded. This also led to the French thinking that the enemy had got the key to the iron lock and opened the iron gate directly. Now, several officials in charge of the keys to the sewer iron gate are being interrogated by the French court. They are bitter in their hearts. The keys were obviously well preserved, so why did they blame them? While the French have not figured out the secret of the sewer iron gate being opened, Marin decided to make persistent efforts and help the British recapture the Calais fortress in one go. As long as England recaptures the Calais fortress, the French will be like having a nail nailed on their backs. If we want to take other actions, it depends on whether the English agree or not. Chapter 1726, Diving Equipment. The Calais fortress is extremely important for both England and France. With the Calais fortress, England can easily intervene in European affairs, easily land a large number of troops in the port of Calais, and then harass northern France. Originally, Henry VIII harassed France in this way. Because Henry VIII's first queen was Princess Catherine of Spain, Henry VIII cooperated with Spain in the early days. Whenever the French army went south to Italy to fight, England would land its army in the port of Calais and then plunder the coastal areas of northern France. When the French reacted and counterattacked, the English army retreated to the Calais fortress without a hurry, and then landed in the port of Calais and returned to England, which made France very angry. The French could not capture the Calais fortress, nor could they control the English Channel. In addition, England chose the right time to send troops, and chose the time when the main force of France went south, so that the French had no way to deal with England. But since Henry VIII's daughter Bloody Mary, Mary I, lost Calais, Britain could no longer easily attack northern France. After all, the landing of the army requires a safe landing at the port. The Calais fortress can not only cover the landing of the British army, but also protect the retreating British army from being chased by the French army. Its function is difficult to replace. After France recaptured the Calais fortress, the northern region suddenly became much more stable, and no longer worried about the English army looting the northern plains. After that, the English could only attack French ports on a small scale, and could not go deep inland to loot France. Edward was not stupid, he also knew the importance of the Calais fortress. However, he gave up because he was not sure of taking back the Calais fortress from the French. Now, there is a chance to take back Calais, and Edward does not want to give up. However, Edward also had his hesitations. Even if the city gates are opened, the 5,000 French troops in the city are not easy to deal with. It is said that there are 500 of France's most elite plate-armored infantry in the city. To deal with them, you have to use muskets. However, it seems that muskets cannot be used on rainy days. No, the muskets of the North Sea Kingdom can be used on rainy days. Count Marin, do you want to support me with a batch? Marin nodded, that's no problem. I will support you with 1,000 musketeers. Each of them is equipped with 50 clockwork ignition carbines, which is enough to deal with the 500 French plate-armored infantry. Edward nodded and said, that's good. For this battle, I plan to send 20,000 troops, and your 4th and 5th legions will send 10,000 troops. How about it? Marin shook his head, I can only send 5,000 troops, and I will never admit that those 5,000 people are my people. Your Majesty, I am different from you. My North Sea Kingdom is on the main road. Once the Calais fortress is lost, the French will not be able to cross the sea to cause trouble for England, but they will have no problem causing trouble for the North Sea Kingdom. So, this time I came here to pretend to be at odds with you, because I was afraid that the French would know that I was willing to send troops to help you recapture the Calais fortress. If 10,000 people were sent, it would be easy for the French to see through it. And if 5,000 people were sent, it would be relatively easy to conceal. After all, most of them are your Majesty's troops. Moreover, after the battle, my troops will withdraw overnight, leaving no opportunity for the French to inquire about the news. Are you so afraid of the French? Edward was speechless. Marin shook his head and said nothing. He had already said this truth. The North Sea Kingdom is on land, and the French cannot retaliate against the British, and may vent their anger on him. Therefore, it is necessary to avoid suspicion. In fact, the strength of the French mainland is not strong at the moment. After all, the main force is in Naples. If Marin is ruthless, he can also get rid of those people in France. However, Marin is worried about being stabbed in the back by the German princes. Moreover, if France really falls, Spain will emerge and become Marin's mortal enemy. Therefore, Marin would rather keep a low profile now than take risks in the past. In addition, Marin actually has a killer hidden, but he didn't tell Edward. Of course, this is just a backup. Marin will only use the killer when the iron gate of the sewer cannot be used. What is the killer? Marin actually dug a tunnel in Calais, which can connect the inside and outside of the city. However, there is a problem with this tunnel. Water has entered. In fact, Marin had already sent spies to Calais to seek to dig a tunnel. But the French in Calais are very strict, so digging a tunnel is very difficult. The difficulty lies mainly in how to avoid the French eyes and deal with the soil dug when digging the tunnel. In order to avoid the eyes of the French, the spies only needed to use the carriages entering and leaving the city, and spread a layer of soil on the bottom of the carriages to secretly smuggle the soil out of the city. Then, they dug a well in public, and actually took out a lot of soil in public. Moreover, the exit of the tunnel was on the wall of the well. This method was actually developed by Marin based on the text, the underground printing house in Tbilisi, that he had learned in his previous life. After all, no one was willing to go down the well to find the entrance to the tunnel easily. However, when the tunnel was dug to the end, a big problem occurred. In the part outside the city, an underground river was dug through, and a large amount of water poured into the tunnel. Then, the more than 200-meter-long tunnel was filled with water. Moreover, the exit outside the city was actually at the bottom of a small river. More than 2 years of hard work was destroyed, and Marin, who learned the news, was so angry that he wanted to kill people. After blocking the exit hole at the bottom of the small river outside the city with stones, the tunnel was temporarily abandoned. Until some time ago, Marin asked someone to get a steel cylinder and an air pump. Because of rubber, making valves became simple. Whether it is a water valve or an air valve, it has become simple. Marin showed that someone made an air pump to lay the foundation for the future production of rubber tires. Then, he asked the blacksmith to help him make a steel cylinder similar to the liquefied gas tank in later generations. Originally, Marin wanted to use this steel cylinder to collect liquefied gas when refining gasoline. After all, it is too wasteful to let the liquefied gas escape directly into the air. Unexpectedly, Marin had a sudden idea to use an air pump to inflate the steel cylinder, and then, it gave birth to the oxygen cylinder commonly used in diving in later generations. It should be pointed out that the gas cylinders used for diving in later generations are not filled with oxygen at all, but compressed air. Marin used an air pump to press into the steel cylinder, which happened to form the diving cylinder commonly used in diving in later generations. Then, Marin naturally thought of inventing the matching diving equipment. What diving goggles and breathing masks, as well as ventilated rubber tubes. The most important thing about these things is that they must be well sealed and cannot leak. And with rubber, these things are not too difficult. After hundreds of failures, qualified products were made. In this way, the water-filled tunnel that failed to be dug before became useful, as long as someone carries a compressed air cylinder and a diving suit, opens the stone blocking the hole at the bottom of the river, and can sneak into the city through the underwater passage. Then, come out through the well in the city and enter the city. As long as hundreds of compressed air cylinders and diving suits are prepared, Marin can lead hundreds of elite soldiers into the city through this underwater passage and secretly open the city gate. This underwater secret passage is a bit like the passage leading to the outside world from the Tomb sect in Jin Yong's novel, The Condor Heroes. However, in the novel, that passage can only be swam through by people with high martial arts skills by holding their breath, otherwise they will almost drown like Li Macho. But Marin understands science, and he also has vulcanized cooked rubber, so he can calmly make a set of diving breathing equipment so that ordinary people can also pass through this long underwater passage. Of course, this is just a backup plan. Only if the plan of using the sewer iron gate fails, this plan will be used as a trump card to conquer the Calais fortress. Chapter 1727, Leaving London. Edward agreed with Marin's suggestion, but frowned and asked, what reason should we use to attack Calais? We can't just send troops without saying anything, right? Europe is not the ancient China where conspiracies and intrigues are rampant. Here, reputation is particularly important. If there is no good excuse, the nobles under his command can even refuse to fight. Marin thought for a while and said, this is simple. You send a noble who is not on good terms with you to the Calais fortress to do business. Then, send someone to assassinate him. Then, you accuse the French of killing the noble, and use this as an excuse to send troops to capture Calais, right? Can it be like this? Edward was a little dumbfounded. He was a little numb to Marin's shamelessness and insidiousness. Of course, in this way, you can solve a noble who opposes you, and you can also get an excuse to attack Calais. How good is that? Edward frowned and said, then, what reason should I use to send this hostile noble to Calais? I can't just say to him you go to Calais for a trip. Marin was stunned and thought that this was true. Then, he thought for a while and said, let's use the old method. England has occupied Calais for many years. There should be many British expatriates there, right? You sent people to assassinate 2 English expatriates and deliberately created conflicts. Don't you have an excuse to send that noble to solve the matter? Assassinate English expatriates? This is not appropriate. Why kill innocent expatriates for no reason? Edward was a little unhappy. He had no objection to killing a hostile noble, after all, he was an enemy, but innocent people. Would God blame him for doing this? Obviously, Edward was still quite superstitious. Marin said indifferently, Your Majesty, there are many English expatriates in Calais, but the problem is that after the French occupied Calais, many English expatriates defected to the French. Many of the truly loyal expatriates returned to England. Therefore, killing 2 expatriate traders who defected to France is no big deal. Marin was right. After the Calais fortress was occupied by France, many English expatriates returned to their country. And those English expatriates who stayed in the Calais fortress, for business and livelihood, many chose to defect to the French. These people actually betrayed England by doing so. After all, England and France have always been enemies. Killing 2 people who defected to the enemy country is really nothing, just like killing 2 guys like Zhang Jihe in later generations. No one will speak for such people, but only applaud. Edward thought about it, why care about the lives of people who betrayed their country? Even if they were killed, God would not blame them. Edward quickly arranged this matter, and Marin also came to the palace where Queen Anna and Princess Margaret were, and saw his son Caesar trying hard to please Princess Margaret, making the little princess giggle. Queen Anna sat quietly aside. Marin glanced at Queen Anna and sighed slightly in his heart. To be honest, Queen Anna did nothing wrong. She did not let her father, Count Det, manipulate her, nor did she target Marin and Caesar. She did things in a proper manner. However, Marin was worried that she would seize power after Edward's death. There are many such women in history. When the emperor was alive, they were very honest and dutiful. But once the emperor died, they changed, began to seize power, and tried to become the queen mother who had the final say. For example, when Emperor Wu of Han was alive, Queen Mother Wang Ji was extremely honest and did not dare to make any unusual moves. Of course, there was also the extremely powerful Queen Mother Do who suppressed her at that time, so she did not dare to mess around. When Emperor Jing of Han and Queen Mother Do both died, Queen Mother Wang Ji, who usually looked harmless, suddenly became arrogant. The reason why her half-brother Tian Fun could become the powerful Prime Minister of Emperor Wu of Han in the early days was inseparable from the support of Wang Ji. It was because he had been fed up with his grandmother, Empress Dowager Do, and his mother, Wang Ji, that when Emperor Wu of Han established Emperor Zhao of Han, Lu Fuling, as the crown prince in his later years, he was worried that Lu Fuling's mother, Lady Gui, would seize power, so he directly ordered Lady Gui to be killed. For Queen Anna, Marin was also worried that after Edward's death, she would seize power with the support of the English nobles and compete with him. But what he was most worried about was that Queen Anna would collude with France to fight against him. If only the nobles of England supported her, Marin would not worry at all, just kill her. Anyway, after Edward's massacre, the power of the English nobles is not very strong now. But if they collude with France, the problem will be big. Needless to say, the strength of France, coupled with the cooperation of the nobles in England, Marin will be unable to resist at that time. Therefore, even if Marin felt guilty, he could only choose to remove Queen Anna, the stumbling block, before Edward died. As for Edward's life, Marin felt no guilt. Why? Because if it weren't for him, Edward should have been killed by Henry VII as early as 1497. I helped him live for so many more years and gave him a daughter, so I think I deserved it. In the following days, when Marin faced Edward's family of 3 in private at the Tower of London, the two sides got along very well. But in public, Marin and Edward deliberately acted unfriendly. Edward was also happy to cooperate with Marin's performance. Anyway, for him, the most important thing was to recapture the Calais fortress. At the same time, England's troops began to act secretly. Edward mobilized 15,000 people from his 20,000 trusted troops. And Marin also quietly asked Sakara to draw 4,000 elite troops to join in. At the same time, 1,000 musketeers and 5,000 clockwork ignition carbines will be mobilized on the mainland to fight against the French plate infantry on rainy days. At the same time, the assassins sent by Edward also crossed the sea to Calais to select the right target. Of course, he was also selecting the hostile nobles who were going to be sent to Calais to die. In this era, the death of expatriates abroad is not enough to trigger a war. After all, ordinary people are not on the stage these days, and their lives and deaths have nothing to do with the king. The king can send someone to care about it, which is already considered loving the people like his own children. But the nobles are different. The nobles are the partners of the king and rule the country with the king. The death of a noble is definitely a big deal, enough to start a war. Therefore, Marin helped Edward design the plan of killing 1 or 2 rebellious expatriates first, then sending a noble to investigate and then killing them. If the expatriates die, you can send an official to pretend to investigate and you can get the job done. But the death of a noble official abroad is a top priority. Because the noble official sent to investigate represents the king, which is equivalent to the identity of an envoy. Of course, these have nothing to do with Marin. In addition to keeping in touch with Edward's family of 3 in private, Marin repeatedly emphasized in public that Princess Margaret should marry his son Caesar. It seemed that he came to London this time just to grab a wife for his son. The English nobles in London held their own opinions. Some believed that the future husband of England's only princess should not be a foreigner. But others believed that according to the treaty signed by the king, England should fulfill its obligations. But not long after, Marin suddenly left London in a hurry and returned to his country. Before leaving, Marin took 3,000 guards and walked around London several times to show his military power. The reason why Marin left London in a hurry was because Edward was ready and about to launch the attack. He didn't want to be involved and confront France in advance, so he left London in advance to avoid suspicion. Chapter 17 28,000-ton battleship. When leaving London, Marin was in a state of drama and began an exaggerated Star-Lord-style performance. He boarded the ship with a curse. After boarding the ship, facing the audience on the London dock, Marin publicly drew his sword, Frostmourne, cut off a guardrail on the ship, and shouted loudly and publicly Princess Margaret was his daughter-in-law and could only marry his son Caesar. Whoever dares to rob will be chopped off. His performance really fooled many people. Some English nobles began to worry that there would be a civil war in the country. After all, Marin had two 10,000-man legions in England. If he was forced into a corner, it would not be a big deal to lead troops to rebel. Even Marin's performance fooled the French. Francois I was very happy when he learned that Marin and England were unhappy. He summoned his trusted nobles and secretly discussed the possibility of using Marin to provoke a civil war in England. After all, if Marin's army provoked a civil war in England, England would inevitably be in chaos. By then, France would have the opportunity to annex England. According to the inference of Francois I and his confidants, whether Edward wins or Marin wins, France will benefit. Marin is not a weakling, but a ruthless person. Even if Edward can win, he will suffer heavy losses. At that time, it will be difficult to resist the invasion of France. If Marin wins, he will be happy. Because Marin's seizure of England is not justified. At that time, he can seize England in the name of helping Edward to avenge. Maybe, he can get a lot of responses from English nobles. Unfortunately, Francois I didn't know that these ideas of his were just fantasies. Because Edward would not be stupid enough to turn against Marin. Even the English were ready to seize the Calais fortress. Back in Emden Port, Marin went to the indoor swimming pool of the secret base to visit the divers' training. Divers are a very powerful branch of the army. In later generations, divers in the army are also called frogmen. Frogmen are very powerful soldiers. They can conduct underwater reconnaissance, dive close to enemy ships, and use bombs to blow up the bottom of enemy ships. They are very powerful soldiers. Moreover, in this era, frogmen's natural enemies, dolphin soldiers and underwater sonar, are not available. If frogmen are well trained, they can be used to blow up enemy warships. For example, frogmen can dive under the enemy's main battleship. Then, use a suction cup device to attach the bomb to the bottom of the enemy ship and detonate it. The ships of this era are all wooden ships, which cannot withstand the explosion of bombs. Once the bottom of the ship leaks, the European sailing ship has no watertight compartment design and can only sink. Of course, in order to achieve the combat purpose, the North Sea Kingdom has to develop a suction cup device to fix the bomb. At the same time, it is necessary to develop powerful bombs. Black powder is too weak and not very suitable for blasting ships. Therefore, Marin wants to develop more powerful bombs. In fact, Marin already has smokeless gunpowder. But if this thing is not passivated, its performance is very unstable. Once it is passivated, the burning speed slows down and it is not suitable for use as an explosive. Therefore, Marin must find another way. Unfortunately, Marin did not understand the manufacturing technology of the famous C4 in later generations, so he could only regretfully give up this artifact. Then, he did not understand picric acid or anything like that. TNT and so on were not clearly explained in later books. Well, then, there is only one choice: Nobel explosives. The most classic Nobel explosives are nitroglycerin combined with diatomaceous earth. This is relatively easy, that is, concentrated nitric acid and glycerin react, and then diatomaceous earth is added. But it is said that this thing is super fierce. When Nobel tested it, it killed his own brother. Marin did not dare to do this thing himself, so he could only find a few people who were not afraid of death to test it. As for how to achieve a safe ratio, he could only try it with human lives. Anyway, he did not dare to configure the test himself. If this kind of NOx explosive is successfully developed, combined with a suction cup device and a moisture-proof ignition system, then the Frogman unit can make the Spanish and Portuguese fleets call him Daddy. In fact, Marin can also send out divers for the battle in Calais. But considering that it is still spring, the water is still relatively cold. If the divers are frozen, it will not be worth the loss. If it is summer, Marin may agree to let the divers go into battle. But time waits for no one. By summer, the French government and opposition may be stable. If the troops are sent out at that time, they may be taught a lesson by the French. Therefore, in a hurry, Marin can only rely on the sewer iron gate to solve the French defense in Calais. After inspecting the training of frogmen in the indoor heated swimming pool, Marin originally planned to rush back to Auric with Angela and Caesar, but a large ship suddenly sailed back to the Emden naval port, forcing Marin to stay and let Angela and Caesar go back first. What big ship appeared in the naval port? It turns out that the shipyard in Long Island, New York, has successfully manufactured a 1,000-ton battleship. The ship that sailed into Emden Harbor was the 1,000-ton battleship test ship that Marin asked the New York shipyard to develop. A few years ago, Marin issued the task of developing a 1,000-ton battleship. At first, this work was carried out at the Emden shipyard. But later, considering the factor of confidentiality, Marin transferred the main craftsman involved to the New York shipyard. The shipyard in Long Island, New York, has piles of wood. They are all high-quality oaks that are at least hundreds of years old and cut down from the North American continent, mainly red oak. Moreover, they have been air-dried for more than 2 years and have reached the standards for shipbuilding. At the Long Island shipyard in New York, it is deadly simple to obtain qualified shipbuilding wood. Just go to any rain shelter where wood is stored. Moreover, every log can be used as a keel. At first, when the local North Sea shipbuilders first arrived at the New York shipyard, they were ecstatic when they saw the logs suitable for keels stored in the rain shelter. But over time, because there were logs suitable for keels everywhere, these shipbuilders became numb. Even if the logs suitable for keels were cut and decomposed and made into ribs, they would not feel sorry. Originally, the 1,000-ton warships were designed and planned to start construction. However, Marin suddenly brought back a group of treasure ship craftsmen from the Ming dynasty. Moreover, he ordered these craftsmen who knew how to build treasure ships to participate in the manufacture of 1,000-ton warships, and required the watertight bulkhead technology to be applied to the manufacture of new warships. Then, the manufacture of 1,000-ton warships was rebuilt. European shipbuilders were mainly responsible for the design and manufacture of keel structures. The treasure ship craftsmen from the Ming dynasty were mainly responsible for the design and manufacture of watertight bulkheads. Then, the two merged to complete the warship together. But it was precisely because of the fusion of the two schools that many conflicts of ideas appeared at the beginning. Therefore, the cooperation between European and Ming craftsmen was not pleasant at first, and many conflicts arose. As a result, the progress of shipbuilding slowed down. It was delayed for several years until the two craftsmen learned from each other and integrated the Eastern and Western technologies, and finally successfully manufactured a 1,000-ton warship with a watertight compartment design. Marin came to the confidential military port with excitement, boarded the 1,000-ton warship that had completed the test, and began to inspect. Chapter 1729 The design of watertight compartments in the bottom cabin. With excitement, Marin boarded the 1,000-ton battleship that had just completed the test. The bottom of the battleship is covered with anti-corrosion stainless steel sheet. Since the discovery of the small chromite mine in Cuba, Marin has been able to make chromium-nickel alloy stainless steel sheet to replace the previous nickel-iron steel sheet. The effect is naturally much better. Of course, the surface of the stainless steel sheet is painted with dark paint. Otherwise, the bright white appearance of stainless steel is too ostentatious. In addition, this battleship is also covered with stainless steel sheet on the side, and it is also painted. In this way, the side is not afraid of the impact of iron ball shells. In fact, the iron sheet on the side is thicker than that on the bottom of the ship. It is probably more appropriate to describe it as a steel plate. Such protection is difficult to break through by ordinary shells. Unless it is a conical shell like the one in later generations, it is easier to break the protection of the side. Moreover, this design is difficult to imitate. Because other countries do not have anti-corrosion steel plates available. If copper is used instead, it can achieve a certain effect. However, this cost. You know, the price of copper in Europe these days is several times more expensive than that in the Ming dynasty. If it is really covered with copper, most European countries can't equip a few ships at all, let alone the hegemony at sea. Therefore, Marin simply relies on the technology tree to bully other countries. I can do it, but you can't. If someone asks, Marin will tell him with a smile this is tinplate. That is, the surface of the iron sheet is tin-plated, you can imitate it. But tinplate does not mention the cost issue. If there is a scratch, the tin sheet will fall off, and the whole piece of iron sheet will soon be finished. Moreover, tinplate is not so resistant to seawater corrosion. Even when nailing, the exposed part of the nail hole can cause the whole piece of tinplate to rust. From the appearance, this battleship has no problem. Its appearance is simply an enlarged version of a 500-ton battleship. In other words, it is a smaller version of the Constitution. Like the Constitution, this battleship also has only a double-layer gun deck. That is, the top open deck and the lower deck, but the open deck, in accordance with Marin's requirements, installed rain shelters on the gun positions to prevent the gunpowder from getting wet. Then, the rain shelter was also covered with steel plates to protect the gunners inside from being hit by enemy shells. In order to resist the recoil torque, the heavy guns on the ship were arranged on the lower deck, while the upper deck was basically arranged with 6-pound and 12-pound light guns, with only 4 18-pound co-faline long guns, that is, red cannons. These 4 red cannons are mainly used to bombard targets on the shore. The reason why they are arranged on the upper deck is that the higher the guns are placed, the farther they can be shot. After all, the shells are parabolas. The same iron ball, standing at a higher place, with the same force, will naturally be delivered farther. The reason why only 4 doors are arranged is that the recoil is too large, causing the hull to tilt severely. However, a designer pointed out that it was enough to arrange 4 doors on a 500-ton battleship before. But the 1,000-ton warship has a stronger resistance to recoil torque, and it can be increased to 8 guns. This is the layout of the top open deck. Next, under the guidance of the ship's staff, Marin entered the lower gun deck. Hey, why is it not a watertight bulkhead? Marin saw the problem at a glance. Because the lower gun deck is not the watertight bulkhead he imagined. The watertight bulkhead divides the same layer into rooms one by one, and each space is closed and can be used as an independent ship. In more specific terms, the watertight bulkhead is similar to bamboo, one section at a time. Each section of bamboo is a sealed air tank that can float independently. However, the lower gun deck that Marin saw is a structure that is interconnected throughout the entire layer, and there is no difference from before. So he cast his suspicious eyes on Captain Hobbit standing next to him. Hobbit came from the New York shipyard and naturally knew the details. He explained, "Grand Duke, the watertight bulkhead is on the bottom floor, not on this floor." Why? Marin frowned and asked, he needed an explanation. Because he had said before that he would try to use watertight bulkheads. Did the people at the New York shipyard take his words as wind? Hobbit quickly explained, the chief designer, Master Turpite, believes that the use of watertight bulkheads on the lower gun deck will affect the interaction between the gunners. You know, the gunners need to move back and forth, and move gunpowder barrels and shells. Most importantly, it is not conducive to the artillery commander to command the gunners. If they are divided into relatively closed rooms, the commander will not be able to command the gunners to fire in unison, and he will have to notify the gunners one by one. This reason is very reasonable. In the era of broadside salvos, if the gunners are really separated in different rooms, it is really not conducive to commanding the shooting. Later warships can use watertight bulkheads because the main guns of later warships are on the upper deck. Moreover, there is a communication system between the commander and the gunners on the ship, so there is no worry that orders are difficult to issue. In this era where command is basically based on shouting, it is indeed necessary to gather the gunners together and shout commands. If it is really made into a watertight bulkhead, it will not work. Marin nodded, which was considered to be an approval of Hobbit's explanation. Hobbit continued to explain, as for the watertight bulkhead, Master Turpite believes that its main purpose is to prevent sinking. The sinking of the ship is mainly due to water leakage in the bottom cabin. As for the lower gun deck, it is usually above the waterline and does not need a watertight bulkhead. Therefore, it is only necessary to design a watertight bulkhead in the lower bottom cabin. Then, Captain Hobbit took Marin to the lower gun deck, opened several doors leading to the bottom cabin, and took Marin along the stairs to visit the bottom cabin. The bottom cabin, which was supposed to be integrated, was divided into 7 cabins because of the design of the watertight bulkhead. Each cabin has a closable cellar door design on the top. Once a cabin leaks, the soldiers on the lower gun deck will first seal it, then pump up the water from the leaking cabin and drain it through the gun port. As long as more than half of the cabins are not leaking, the ship will not sink. If the leak in a cabin is really difficult to fill, but the ship cannot sink, you can also choose to seal the cellar door above that cabin. Then, the ship drags the wounded body and insists on going to the nearest port that has been deliberately repaired. Usually, when nothing happens, the bottom cabin is generally used to load cargo, and some of the bottom cabin is used to live, mainly for sailors. But because there is no sunlight in the bottom cabin and it is dark, sailors usually don't go down until it's time to rest. Moreover, officers will not live in the bottom cabin where the air is not well circulated, but in the room on the lower gun deck. However, because the North Sea Kingdom has very strict management of ship hygiene, the bottom cabin is usually cleaned very cleanly and there is no peculiar smell. Even the cabin with a toilet is cleaned relatively cleanly. Unlike ships in other countries in this era, the bottom cabin is full of stench and there are many rats living. Chapter 1730, Dreadnought-class battleship. How did the European plague come from? In fact, it was brought to Europe by Asian rats that sneaked into the ship when Italian sailors were transporting goods to West Asia. Europeans had never seen the plague at that time, so naturally there was no resistance. Then, tens of millions of people were killed. This is almost the same as the American Indians who had never seen smallpox. The millions of Taino people on the island of Haiti were directly exterminated by smallpox. Why can rats survive on Italian merchant ships? It's not that the ancients didn't pay attention to hygiene. Especially the Europeans in the Middle Ages, they were so dirty. They didn't take a bath, and they liked to urinate and defecate everywhere. The city was made stinky, and the ship was not much better. Because they didn't pay attention to hygiene, the ship was naturally very dirty and messy, and it was not surprising that rats got in. Especially in the dim and dark bottom cabin, rats hid in the corners and were very difficult to find. Marin paid great attention to the hygiene on the ship from the beginning. The army and warships repeatedly issued orders to improve internal hygiene and also conducted inspections and evaluations. In addition, Marin was the first person in Europe in this era to advocate keeping cats. In addition to the black cat, which is regarded as an ominous thing, Marin encourages the people of the North Sea to keep cats to catch mice. On the ship, Marin requires every ship to keep cats to catch mice. After all, some mice are easy to mix into the ship with the cargo, which cannot be avoided by maintaining good internal hygiene. Therefore, keeping cats on board is an important means to deal with mice. In addition, every ship in the North Sea is equipped with a small trawl with a winch. This trawl can catch hundreds of pounds of fish at a time, which can not only improve the food for sailors, but also keep cats, which can be said to kill two birds with one stone. This leads to the fact that the ocean-going ships of the North Sea are never short of food, but only lack fresh water and vitamin C. As for the firepower on the ship, Marin looked at it. The lower gun deck is mainly 32-pound Karen naval guns. Although this kind of gun has a large caliber, it has a short barrel and a small total weight. Although the range is not far, if the 32-pound iron ball hits it, with the level of warships in other European countries at this time, it will be in trouble. Moreover, the short barrel and light weight have another great advantage, that is, fast loading speed. The short barrel makes it relatively easy for the gunner to load. And the light weight makes it easy to carry and reset. In this way, its shooting speed is much more convenient than those heavy long guns. According to the gunner's tests, the average loading time of the 18-pound red cannon is about 2 minutes. The Karen naval gun only takes half the time to complete the loading. The only problem is that the large-caliber artillery consumes too much gunpowder. The North Sea Kingdom can now afford to build cannons, but cannot afford gunpowder. Fortunately, Marin is now buying more Egyptian slaves and camels and sending them to Chile to expand the production and transportation of saltpeter mines there. As long as the saltpeter production there comes up, these Karen naval guns can bombard enemy ships to their heart's content. After visiting the entire battleship, it is Marin's turn to model the battleship. Marin asked for detailed data. The whole ship has a displacement of 1,000 tons, a double-layer gun deck, and 50 guns, which is very consistent with the standards of the British sailing warships of the 18th century. The British fourth-level ship has a crew of 350 people, but the Long Island shipyard in New York has given a relatively compact staffing of 320 people. Marin thought about it and agreed with the suggestion of the New York shipyard. Because he is short of sailors now. A fourth-level ship requires 320 people, and 20 ships require 6,400 sailors. Now the North Sea Kingdom is equipped with 5,400 sailors on 3,500-ton warships. In addition to the thousands of sailors on hundreds of 250-level armed merchant ships. Marin suddenly felt that there were too few sailors in the North Sea Kingdom. At this time, his desire to annex England became more urgent. Because there are enough English sailors. Unlike Germany, it mainly relies on the Frisians, the only seafaring race in Germany. The Dutch are not counted. Fortunately, Marin is now bewitching the Dutch nobles to play enclosure and sheep farming. Perhaps, it won't be long before a large number of Dutch people who have lost their land will have to accept their own recruitment to serve as sailors for themselves. Today, the North Sea Kingdom has two main types of ships: 500-ton Hoffman-class battleships and 250-ton, 250-class armed merchant ships. Among them, the naming of the 250-class armed merchant ship is very sloppy. Of course, it is also a transitional model and is not taken seriously. And this 1,000-ton battleship is obviously very important. In Marin's plan, it will build 20 ships in the first batch and become the main battleships of the North Sea Navy. There are 20,000-ton main battleships, combined with 3,500-ton Hoffman-class main battleships. The combination of these 50 super battleships can basically defeat any European country. The premise is that there is enough ammunition. But with the expansion of Chilean saltpeter production, the day when these warships can let go and fire as hard as they can should not be far away. You know, this is a warship covered with stainless steel sheets and steel plates. Even the British in the 18th century could not reach this level. At most, the British only covered the warships with copper sheets below the waterline. Moreover, only the main battleships have this treatment. Ordinary warships are bare below the waterline. Because of their powerful performance, Marin thinks that this kind of warship should be invincible. However, if it is named Invincible class, it will be too hateful and will not fit Marin's low-key personality. After thinking about it, Marin decided to name the battleship Dreadnought class battleship, or Dreadnought for short. This name is a copy of the main cannon battleship during World War I. In World War I, the Dreadnought was actually an invincible main battleship. Other types of battleships can only bow their heads and admit defeat in front of the Dreadnought's huge guns and new armor. It can be said that the Dreadnought was the synonym of invincibility at sea at that time. And what about this 1,000-ton battleship of the North Sea Kingdom? Although the technical level and combat effectiveness are far inferior to the Dreadnoughts of World War I. However, in this technologically backward era, this kind of battleship covered with stainless steel plates and large-caliber heavy guns can indeed be regarded as an invincible opponent at sea. The title of dreadnought does not disgrace this illustrious reputation. After all, the protection of this type of battleship with stainless steel plates on the side is comparable to that of the dreadnoughts of the World War I with new armor. They are so durable and resistant to beatings. And the Karen naval guns on the battleships, well, in this era, they are also equivalent to the deterrent power of the more than 300mm caliber main guns on the dreadnoughts. After all, the Karen naval guns are only used to hit wooden ships. And the more than 300mm giant main guns hit the opponent's composite steel armor. Moreover, the title of dreadnought is more modest than invincible and victory. Fearless, just be bold and brave. However, the names of invincible and victorious are too arrogant and easy to be beaten up by the crowd. So, this new 1,000-ton battleship covered with stainless steel and steel plates was happily named Dreadnought by Marin. But in fact, the size of this battleship is equivalent to the 4th-class battleship of Britain in the 18th century. The only thing that is stronger than the 4th-class battleship is probably the stainless steel armor. This kind of armor can indeed be fearless in this era.